It starts, as many legends do, not with fire and screams, but with silence. Spain in the late 15th century was a place of deep contrasts, golden cathedrals and rotting prisons, sacred hymns and whispered accusations. The year is 1499. The streets of Toledo are still slick with morning dew, quiet but not calm. Behind the thick walls of a stone monastery, a man wakes before dawn. His name is Father Tomás de la Vega. By royal decree and divine blessing, he is an inquisitor. We imagine an inquisitor as a figure carved from myth, hooded, merciless, a torturer in shadow. But what does he do when he opens his eyes? When his feet first touch the cold floor? What fills the hours between prayer and punishment? The answer is not simple. Because the Inquisition was not just a tool of fear, it was an institution of power, paperwork, ritual, and calculation. And the men who ran it were not demons. They were bureaucrats with robes, ambition, and a warped sense of justice. Father Tomás's day begins well before the bells of morning mass. His room is bare, one cot, one crucifix, a writing desk with quill and ink. There are no luxuries. Inquisitors were expected to be models of discipline, a performance of piety for a role that required harshness. He washes with cold water, recites a psalm, dresses not in armor but in simple dark robes. Nothing flamboyant. Authority does not need gold when it has the blessing of both the crown and the church. Today's docket is heavy. 2 suspected Judaizers, 1 accused blasphemer, and a midwife rumored to have used herbs of the devil. None of these are crimes in a modern sense, but in this Spain, faith is law. And deviation from the faith is treason. The Spanish Inquisition, despite its modern reputation, wasn't originally created to chase witches or burn random heretics. It was designed to root out insincerity. Converts from Judaism and Islam, many of whom had become Christian under pressure, were scrutinized relentlessly. Eating lamb on a Friday? Lighting candles on Saturday night? Using Hebrew phrases in secret? All potential proof of heresy. Outside, the city stirs slowly. Merchants begin arranging their stalls. A beggar coughs in an alley. But in the cloistered hall of the Holy Office, scribes are already at work. They transcribe witness statements, categorize evidence, and copy orders sent from Madrid. In the next room, a wooden chest holds denunciations, anonymous letters from neighbors, servants, even children. Some are fabricated. Others are deadly accurate. Father Tomás knows the difference. He's trained to read between lies and guilt. But this morning, before any interviews or interrogations, he kneels. Not out of guilt, out of obligation. Inquisitors were not above prayer. They lived in it. Each decision, each sentence passed, was justified as being in service to eternal truth. Father Tomás doesn't see himself as cruel. He sees himself as necessary. Like a surgeon cutting out rot. Like fire purifying gold. He rises and moves to the hearing room. It's not a dungeon. Not yet. It's a small, stone chamber lined with wooden benches. A crucifix hangs on the far wall. A table in the center holds a ledger. No torture devices in sight, those are reserved for more serious stages. Today, he will begin with Marcos Ben Salomon, a cloth merchant arrested last week after a servant claimed to witness him reciting Hebrew prayers at night. The merchant enters, bound but not beaten. Father Tomás greets him not with anger, but with quiet firmness. He offers the man water. He asks about his family. This is the most dangerous part of the day, not the pain, but the persuasion. The Inquisition was skilled not in violence alone, but in control. Convincing a man to condemn himself was considered a higher victory than forcing it from him under duress. But we'll pause here because this is only the start. This is not a horror story told in extremes. It's a slow unraveling. A day filled not just with flames, but with paperwork, routine, doubt, and rituals designed to make oppression feel holy. And as we continue, we'll follow Father Tomás through every moment, from whispers and writings to punishments and prayer, to understand how fear was formalized into an institution. Not by monsters, but by men. If you're intrigued by this journey into the darker corners of history and want to follow every twist and contradiction that made it possible, consider subscribing. We've only begun to peel back the veil. The first interrogation begins not with shouting, but with silence. The accused, Marcos Ben Salomon, is seated opposite Father Tomás. Between them, a table. On it, a single sheet of parchment with a list of questions pre-approved by the tribunal. There's no candlelight, no dramatic shadows, just the cold weight of formality. The silence is part of the ritual. In the Inquisition, silence was not absence, it was control. It made the accused fill in the void. And often they did. Marcos is in his late 40s. Tired eyes, worn boots. A man shaped by trade, not theology. But that doesn't matter here. What matters is that he was born into a Jewish family, converted to Christianity during the royal decrees of forced conversion, and has now been accused of secretly clinging to the old faith. Inquisitors had no interest in whether someone believed in heresy. They pursued whether someone practiced it or even gave the appearance of doing so. Father Tomas doesn't rush. He opens the session with a question that seems benign. How long have you lived in Toledo? The answer is known. It's on record. But the purpose isn't information. It's rhythm. Questions that start as soft can turn sharp without warning. One moment, a man is speaking of his neighborhood. The next, he's being asked why his neighbor claims he doesn't eat pork. That's exactly where the conversation leads. The question lands with deceptive ease. Do you observe all Christian fast days? Marcos nods. And the feasts? He nods again. Do you eat pork regularly? A pause. Not long, but long enough. Father Tomas notes it. Pauses are confessions to a man trained in this craft. The answer that follows matters less than the hesitation that preceded it. Over the next hour, the questions multiply. Has he attended Mass every Sunday? Has he confessed regularly? Does he own any books written in Hebrew? Has he received guests after sundown on Fridays? The phrasing never shifts into accusation, not yet. The goal here isn't to condemn, it's to observe. How does the suspect respond under sustained pressure? What inconsistencies appear? Does his face betray fear, confusion, or anger? By the end of the session, no formal charge has been made. But Father Tomas has what he needs: a tone, a gesture, a hesitation enough to justify further inquiry. The merchant is escorted back to his cell, not yet broken, but no longer stable. The walls are closing in. And they were designed to. Tomas returns to his study. The room is sparse, with only a high window letting in muted light. On his desk, notes from the morning, the merchant's testimony, and a fresh denunciation. This one is brief, a single sentence scribbled in nervous handwriting. My neighbor Dona Catalina keeps strange herbs and speaks to shadows. He reads it twice. It's absurd. But absurdity doesn't disqualify a case. In fact, it's often a starting point. Accusations of witchcraft were less common in Spain than in other parts of Europe, but they weren't unheard of. The Inquisition's primary focus was religious purity, heresy, not sorcery. But when folk practices blurred too closely with pagan rituals, especially among women, the line became flexible. Superstition was not always punished until it was tied to perceived rebellion or defiance. Dona Catalina, the midwife in question, is already known to the tribunal. Not for crimes, but for rumors. She has delivered children for wealthy and poor alike. She has healed wounds with poultices, calmed fevers with chants. Some call her a gift. Others, especially jealous clergy or rivals, whisper darker things. Before acting, Father Tomas consults the Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous witch-hunting manual imported from Germany. He doesn't fully trust it, too theatrical, too obsessed with lust and demonic pacts. But it's useful in one way: it offers procedural precedent. If needed, he knows how to justify an examination of a woman suspected of witchcraft, even in a conservative jurisdiction like Castile. For now, he marks the accusation for review. No summons yet. Instead, he moves to the next item on his list: a man named Juan de Córdoba, arrested not for heresy or superstition, but for speaking aloud that God does not punish greed. It may sound minor, but in the theology of the Inquisition, even questioning sin was sin itself. Speech was sacred. Blasphemy was infection. The Inquisition didn't just police practice, it policed language. Words had weight. The wrong phrase could be seen as proof of spiritual rot, especially if it was said in public or in front of others, or worse, written down. Father Tomas knows this case will be quick. Juan is poor, uneducated, and has no powerful friends. He will be summoned, confronted, and most likely will confess quickly, whether out of fear or confusion. These kinds of cases pad the tribunal's numbers. They show diligence. They remind the city that even the smallest deviation is being watched. As the bells chime for midday prayer, Tomas joins the other clergy in the chapel. They kneel. They chant. They ask forgiveness for sins they believe they do not commit, while preparing to punish others for sins they may not understand. There is no contradiction, not in their minds. Because the mission is clear: protect the soul of Spain. At any cost. After the service, a modest meal is served. Bread, broth, water. No indulgence. Inquisitors were expected to embody restraint. They could wield power, yes, but not enjoy it too openly. Excess bred suspicion. And suspicion in their world was a step away from accusation. Back at his desk, Father Tomas writes. His pen scratches across parchment, logging details, summarizing confessions, annotating inconsistencies. The day is only half done, but the machinery is well in motion. Every word he writes becomes part of a system that can destroy or absolve depending on how it is read, repeated, or interpreted. Outside, the city carries on, unaware or pretending to be. Children play. Merchants haggle. Lovers steal glances. But somewhere in Toledo, 3 people sit in silence, wondering which part of their life will be the next to be questioned. And Father Tomas, the man tasked with safeguarding faith, prepares for his next case. Because in the Inquisition, faith was never private. It was public, performative, and always at risk of betrayal, even by the innocent. The second half of the day begins with a name. It's written on a folded slip of paper placed quietly on Father Tomas's desk by a novice, the kind of small, secret gesture that speaks volumes. The name is Nicholas Herrera, a scholar, a man of letters. And according to the note, a man who has been heard asking dangerous questions about the soul. Tomas reads it twice, then once more aloud under his breath. Dangerous questions. It's a phrase with no fixed definition. It could mean theology. It could mean philosophy. Or it could mean politics cloaked in theological curiosity. In Spain, that's often the most dangerous heresy of all. The file on Herrera is thin. A short list of writings, a lecture transcript, and one statement from a student who claimed his teacher once said heaven may not exist, and if it does, God would not send us there for doubt alone. The statement itself is vague, possibly misquoted, possibly invented. But for the Holy Office, it's enough to open inquiry. The Inquisition did not need proof as we understand it. It needed patterns, reputations, hints of inconsistency. Faith was measured not by certainty but by compliance. And scholars, with their books, their logic, their fondness for abstraction, they were often dangerously close to insubordination even when they didn't realize it. Tomas sends word for Nicholas to appear, not under arrest, not yet. A formal invitation to discuss his teachings. It's a trap in the bureaucratic sense of the word. It's designed to seem civil. But from the moment Nicholas walks through the door, he enters a space where every word is recorded, every facial twitch studied, every phrase double-edged. This is what makes the Inquisition so effective and so chilling. It is not a mob with torches. It is a machine of soft voices and official forms. The destruction it enacts is legal, documented, and delivered with the quiet confidence of divine sanction. While he waits for Herrera's arrival, Tomas returns to the case of Dona Catalina. He's sent an assistant to speak with several women in the market district, discreetly, gently. Nothing official. Just questions. Is she respected? Feared? What herbs does she sell? Are her hands ever stained red with unfamiliar flowers? The responses are mixed. Some praise her. Others hint that she knows things no Christian woman should know. It's not enough for arrest, but it's enough for surveillance. This is how the Inquisition expands. Slowly, patiently, it watches before it strikes. And even when it does, the blow is delivered with the language of salvation, not punishment. Every prison is a chance for penance. Every sentence an invitation to confess. As the sun begins to lower, Herrera arrives. He is well-dressed, composed, clearly not afraid, at least not yet. Tomas greets him without hostility. Offers him a seat, a drink. The tone is that of an academic meeting, not a judicial one. They begin by discussing doctrine, safe territory. They speak of St. Augustine, of Aristotle, of Aquinas. It's cordial, even pleasant. Then, without warning, Tomas pivots. He asks Herrera directly, "Do you believe that unbaptized souls may find peace?" A pause. Slight. Herrera replies cautiously, "I believe God's mercy is infinite." It's the wrong answer. Not because it's blasphemous, but because it leaves room for ambiguity. And in this world, ambiguity is dangerous. Clarity is control. Herrera has revealed that he thinks. And worse, that he doubts. The meeting ends without incident. No accusations made. No chains applied. But as Herrera leaves, Tomas makes a note, intelligent. Proud. Vulnerable to theological drift. Watch closely. Outside, the city is shifting into evening. The marketplace quiets. Windows shutter. The streets thin out. But within the tribunal, the gears continue to turn. Tomas moves on to the day's final item, a prisoner in long-term confinement. A former priest named Esteban, accused of preaching salvation without confession. A theological misdemeanor by some standards, but a direct challenge to the sacramental order by inquisitorial ones. Esteban has been in the cells for 7 weeks. He has confessed once, recanted twice, and remains, in the words of the court, spiritually unstable. Tomas visits him not to extract more confession, but to assess whether he is ready for sentencing. The cell is cold, dim, and silent. Esteban looks older than his years, bent, hollow-eyed, still clutching a rosary even as his faith seems fractured. Tomas sits with him for 15 minutes. Says little. Just listens. Watches. He looks not for rebellion but for surrender. The Inquisition did not always seek execution. What it truly wanted was submission, a soul returned, bent, and remade in the shape of orthodoxy. Before leaving, Tomas offers Esteban a final chance to embrace the Church's judgment. The man nods, but it's unclear whether it's in agreement or simply exhaustion. Either way, it's noted as cooperation. Back in his quarters, Tomas writes again. The ink flows quickly. His hand knows the motions. Each report, each observation will be compiled and passed upward. Nothing he does is hidden. Everything is documented. In this system, records are sacred as Scripture. As night fully descends, Tomas lights a single candle. He does not pray. Not yet. Instead, he rereads his notes. Marcos the merchant, Catalina the midwife, Herrera the scholar, Esteban the priest. Each one a different kind of risk. Each one a different kind of story. But all of them, like everyone in this city, live under the same rule, orthodoxy or oblivion. This is the world he inhabits. Not because he loves cruelty, but because he believes truly that without enforcement, faith becomes fiction. And in his eyes, fiction is the devil's greatest disguise. Tomorrow will bring more names, more whispers, more prayers whispered in fear rather than faith. And Father Tomas will rise again before the sun, not to question his purpose, but to fulfill it. The day ends not when the sun sets, but when the mind slows. For Father Tomas, that doesn't happen easily. He has been trained to be a machine of memory and discernment, to observe, to interpret, to assign weight to details others would overlook. As he lies on his modest cot in the monastery's eastern wing, he does not drift into sleep. Not yet. He replays the events of the day, silently, as if reviewing a ledger of sins not his own but under his care. Each moment carries moral significance. Each name is not merely a person but a symbol of the larger task to preserve the unity of faith in a kingdom held together by fear and belief. The Inquisition is not a side project. It is a tool of statecraft. The monarchy relies on it to control a diverse and fragile realm where loyalty is judged not just by politics but by the way one crosses oneself, the bread one eats, the prayers one mumbles behind closed doors. And Tomas, like his fellow inquisitors, serves that structure not with sword or coin, but with parchment, silence, and judgment. In his world, peace is maintained by pressure. Uniformity is achieved through constant vigilance. His sleep, when it comes, is shallow. Brief dreams cloud his mind, images of Esteban muttering prayers in a dark cell, of Dona Catalina surrounded by herbs and silent women, of Nicholas Herrera standing tall as he gave answers too elegant to trust. These aren't nightmares. They are working thoughts. The mind of an inquisitor never leaves the chamber. It walks through streets, sits at kitchen tables, watches what people say when they think no one is listening. Before dawn breaks, he is awake again. The ritual repeats. Water on the face. A whispered psalm. A robe tied tightly at the waist. This day will begin with a hearing, not an interrogation. It is an appeal, rare and often ignored, from a young man previously sentenced to penance. His crime was minor, speaking words in Arabic during a transaction in the souk. But in post-Reconquista Spain, Arabic is more than a language. It is a remnant of the Moors, a reminder of centuries of Islamic rule, and therefore a symbol of resistance. Speaking it openly is a risk. The man was lucky to receive penance instead of lashes or prison. But now he claims the punishment was unjust. The tribunal hears the appeal with cold formality. Tomas does not argue. He observes. The man speaks nervously, hands trembling. He insists the words were habit, not heresy, a slip of tongue, not a rejection of faith. The panel deliberates briefly. The sentence stands. It is not the punishment that matters, but the example. Language is power. And in this new Spain, only one tongue may rule. By mid-morning, Tomas returns to his study. On his desk is a report from Seville, a list of recent confessions, including one man who named a traveling apothecary as a source of forbidden powders. Such reports are common. The Inquisition maintains a network across Spain, fed by confessions, letters, rumors. It does not act on everyone, but all are recorded. Knowledge is control. Silence can be fatal, but information is protection. The rest of the day unfolds with clinical rhythm. A scribe reads testimony aloud. Tomas corrects a misstatement. A young friar requests permission to copy records. An elder inquisitor sends word asking for his opinion on a case in Avila. No chains, no fire, just decisions made in rooms filled with ink, dust, and theology. And then, without warning, the atmosphere shifts. The Archbishop of Toledo arrives. This is rare. He is not part of the tribunal, but his authority supersedes all within the city. His appearance signals importance or danger. Tomas stands as the prelate enters, bowing just enough to show deference without weakness. The Archbishop brings with him a sealed document from Madrid. Royal seal. New orders. A directive. It outlines the case of a noble family in Valencia suspected of harboring banned texts, books not of witchcraft or heresy but of philosophy. Translations of Islamic thinkers, texts on astronomy, even poetry written under pen names. None are openly subversive. But in the climate of control, even curiosity can be criminal. Tomas is instructed to assist in the inspection. His expertise is needed. His discretion expected. He reads the order 3 times before locking it away. This will not be a normal case. Nobles are dangerous to confront. They have networks, wealth, patrons. To accuse them publicly requires caution. The Inquisition has burned peasants and scholars with ease, but nobility demands a different kind of fire, slow, hidden, strategic. He writes a private note to a trusted clerk in Valencia. Begins gathering names. This will take weeks, perhaps months. But it must begin now. The order is not optional. By late afternoon, he visits the chapel alone. No ceremony, just stillness. He kneels, not to confess, but to listen. He believes the voice of God speaks in silence if one can bear to wait long enough to hear it. And as the sun slips behind the monastery walls, Tomas finally exhales. His day ends as it began, with silence, order, and the certainty that whatever he did in the name of salvation. He believes that deeply, even when his hands write orders for arrest, even when his words lead to fear, even when he suspects, in the quietest part of his soul, that some of those he judges may be more righteous than he. The following morning arrives with rain. Not a storm, but a slow, persistent drizzle that slicks the stone courtyards of the monastery and mutes the city's usual hum. Rain is a good omen to some, a cleansing. But for the Inquisition, the weather rarely changes anything. The machinery runs, rain or sun, because truth, as defined by its courts, is not seasonal. It is permanent, immovable, cold. Tomas rises early, as always. But today his steps are heavier. Not from fatigue, but from the weight of an assignment he cannot yet speak aloud. The investigation into the Valencian nobility must begin quietly, even within the walls of the Holy Office. Only the Archbishop and select tribunal heads know. To the others, today is like any other, files, confessions, orders to review. But there is a new arrival in the holding cells. A messenger had come before dawn, soaked through, with a note from the outskirts of the city. A woman elderly brought in for questioning after being found with a manuscript written in Aramaic. The guards didn't know what it was. They assumed it was Hebrew, and for most, that was enough. Aramaic is a scholarly tongue, rare, but not forbidden. Yet the optics are dangerous. A woman of low status with strange texts is an easy target for suspicion. Tomas reads her name, Miriam. No surname. Likely a convert or from a family who once was. She's been given bread and water. No chains yet, no interrogation. Just the waiting room of judgment. That gray space where truth is shaped not by fact but by how convincingly one can explain themselves before being asked to kneel. He instructs a scribe to locate a translator familiar with Semitic languages. Quietly. No public posting. If this woman's manuscript proves to be theological rather than ritualistic, a psalm or a commentary, the case will be contained. But if it holds content deemed heretical, the fire will spread. By mid-morning, the rain has lightened, but the tension inside the tribunal has not. Tomas sits for a confession, not from a prisoner, but a volunteer. A man named Felipe, middle-aged, trembling, asking to speak with the Holy Office. These are the most unpredictable moments. Self-denunciations can be cries for mercy or attempts to accuse others under the guise of guilt. Felipe admits to nothing major. He says he doubts too often, that his faith feels thin, that he sometimes fears God's silence more than his wrath. These are not crimes, at least not officially. But the Inquisition collects everything. Doubt recorded is a future tool. Tomas listens without expression, scribes take note, and Felipe is dismissed with penance and the soft threat of continued observation. In the afternoon, Tomas walks the hall of records. It is long, high-vaulted, cold. Shelves upon shelves of inked testimony, signed confessions, sealed judgments. The air smells of paper, wax, old wood. This is the true power of the Inquisition, not the dungeon or the stake, but the archive. These records give them reach beyond what swords or soldiers could achieve. They create memory. They freeze reputations in ink. He finds an older file marked in red wax. A case from 15 years earlier, a merchant's daughter arrested for owning Arabic poetry. She was 17. No formal trial, just detainment and eventual exile. He reads the summary. Her name was Layla. No mention of her family's fate. The case is closed, forgotten. But not erased. Never erased. Back in his study, the translator arrives. A monk from Cordoba, gaunt and scholarly with tired eyes and an ink-stained beard. He carries the manuscript recovered from the woman named Miriam. After an hour of quiet reading, the monk returns his verdict. It is not heretical. It's a funeral lament centuries old. The kind of text passed down in oral tradition, eventually copied in moments of personal devotion. A prayer for the dead, not a threat to the church. Tomas exhales. He orders the woman released, not free, but watched. Her name added to a quiet list of people not yet dangerous, but no longer invisible. He writes a note to her local priest, asking that she be gently reintegrated into the parish. Not out of kindness, but strategy. People who feel welcomed are easier to monitor. Isolation breeds secrets. As evening falls, Tomas attends a private meal hosted by a fellow Inquisitor. A small gathering, no outsiders. They eat simply. Conversation dances around doctrine, authority, recent verdicts. Occasionally, laughter breaks through, dry, controlled. These are not monsters celebrating cruelty. They are men fulfilling what they see as a sacred duty. Their hands are steady, their words precise. They speak of purification, not persecution. But when the wine is low and the night grows quiet, one of them raises a question not unlike those they punish. He asks what would happen if the Inquisition ever judged itself. There is a pause. Tomas looks at the man. No one answers. The table falls silent. Then, as if nothing happened, the host pours more wine and moves on to safer topics. The night ends with that silence still in the air. Tomas returns to his quarters, his robe damp with evening mist. He opens his ledger, makes 2 final notes, and closes it with care. He says no prayers tonight. He simply sits in the dark, eyes open, mind clear, heart neither joyful nor burdened. This is the life he has chosen. Or perhaps the life that was chosen for him. The rain has stopped. The city sleeps. And tomorrow the names will come again. The sun rises on a city that doesn't know it's being watched. Toledo, like most of Spain's major towns in this era, lives with a dual awareness: what is seen in the streets and what is whispered behind doors. Publicly, citizens attend Mass, recite the Creed, and show the signs of piety expected of good Christians. Privately, many still cling to old customs, inherited phrases, small habits that once defined who they were before conversion, before the threat of the Inquisition's reach made such identities dangerous. For Father Tomas, this divide is the battlefield. Not one marked by blood or flags, but by subtle betrayals of the ideal Spain. He believes himself a guardian of that ideal, even if the lines blur between justice and fear. This morning begins like most, the murmur of prayers in the chapel, the cold floor beneath his feet, the first sip of water in silence. But something is different today. There is a case waiting for him that comes not from denunciation, but from within the church itself. The note arrives from a high-ranking friar in the nearby province of Cuenca. A young novice, barely 17, has been accused by his own abbot of repeating errors found in forbidden texts. The errors in question involve natural philosophy, questions about the shape of the earth, the structure of the heavens, and whether divine action can be measured by motion. On the surface, this is not theology. But it touches it. And anything that touches doctrine, especially from someone within the clergy, is grounds for concern. Tomas reviews the letter twice. The tone is not panicked, but careful. The abbot does not request punishment. He requests clarity. Whether the young man's studies are misguided curiosity or the beginning of heretical deviation. This is the gray zone the Inquisition specializes in. Not punishing what is obviously dangerous, but identifying the dangerous in what appears benign. He writes a formal reply, instructing the novice be kept under gentle isolation, not punishment, but protection as the letter frames it. He will travel there himself within the week. Cases involving clergy must be handled in person. They are delicate. They require presence, not paper. Back in Toledo, the day moves forward. The tribunal is reviewing older cases this week, a backlog of unresolved confessions and pending decisions. Some are simple. A woman who confessed to praying in Latin improperly is assigned 5 public prayers and instructed to attend confession twice monthly. A man who missed Mass 3 Sundays in a row is fined. These may seem petty, but they form the backbone of the Inquisition's power, consistency. When even minor offenses are addressed, people learn that nothing is beneath notice. But not every case is simple. Tomas is handed a report from the southern outskirts. A rural village priest has accused an entire household of secretly observing Jewish mourning rituals. The accusation stems from a funeral held the previous month where a neighbor claimed to have seen candles lit in a foreign manner and strange words spoken under breath. The priest did not act immediately. He feared retaliation or false accusation. But with pressure from local officials, the matter has reached the Holy Office. Tomas reads the priest's account slowly. He has seen many like it. In rural Spain, the line between old traditions and heresy is razor-thin. In some villages, converted families still whisper Hebrew blessings they no longer understand. Not out of rebellion, but because it's what their grandparents did. Culture does not vanish on command. And yet, for the Inquisition, intent matters less than the act. Observing non-Christian rites, even unknowingly, signals spiritual danger. He assigns the case to a junior inquisitor with instructions to observe, not confront. Too much force in a small village can fracture more than it heals. What Tomas wants is information, names, habits, timelines. The Inquisition does not rush. It surrounds. At midday, he walks the halls alone. Not out of reflection, but to feel the pulse of the place. The monastery is large, quiet, efficient. Every footstep echoes. The scribes work without speaking. The guards are trained to appear neutral, neither cruel nor soft. This entire building is theater designed to radiate seriousness. Even its silence is rehearsed. In the courtyard, he pauses to look at the olive tree planted 2 decades ago. A gift from a former inquisitor now retired. Its branches twist skyward, weathered, unmoved. It has grown here in the center of this place of judgment, living, watching, never judged. He finds it poetic, but says nothing. Returning to his study, he reviews correspondence. A letter from Seville warns of increased movement of books, printed materials crossing borders from Flanders and northern Italy. Many are innocuous, religious commentaries, Latin poetry. But some are dangerous. Translations of Erasmus. Early whispers of reformist thinking. Spain is not yet touched by the Reformation sweeping parts of Europe, but the signs are coming. And the Inquisition is already positioning itself to respond. The printed word is the new battlefield. Manuscripts once passed quietly between scholars. Now, presses make ideas into weapons. Tomas knows this. He respects the danger of the book far more than that of the blade. Blades kill. Books persuade. And persuasion is permanent. That evening, he meets briefly with a courier from Madrid. No rank, no robes, just a man with a sealed pouch. Inside, updates from the Suprema, the central inquisitorial authority. Mostly statistics, number of cases opened, closed, punishments delivered. But hidden within the figures is a message: surveillance is increasing. The Crown is concerned about unrest, whispers of protest, foreign influence. The Holy Office must tighten its grip. He reads the note twice, then burns it. As night falls, the rain begins again. The city beneath him glistens. Candles in windows. Dogs barking in alleyways. Life continues. But beneath it all, the slow churn of fear persists, not dramatic, not loud, but constant. People adjust their words. They avoid certain questions. They lower their voices in prayer. This, more than punishment, is the legacy of the Inquisition. It doesn't need to burn cities. It just needs to make people wonder who is listening. And in Toledo, someone always is. The next day is unusually quiet in the tribunal chambers, but Tomas knows this kind of silence is deceptive. The absence of immediate crises does not mean there is peace. It means things are shifting beneath the surface. The Inquisition is like a furnace, it must be fed constantly. When no flames are visible, the coals are still burning. Today's docket contains no interrogations, no public hearings. That doesn't mean the day will be idle. The majority of an inquisitor's work is not spectacle, it's process. Behind every confession is a stack of paperwork, and behind every accusation, a trail of crossed names and informal intelligence. Even fear must be managed through documents. Every signature reinforces the system. Tomas spends the morning reviewing correspondence from smaller tribunals scattered throughout Castile and Aragon. These satellite offices send summaries weekly, names of accused, outcomes of trials, trends in local behavior. The goal is uniformity. What is punished in Córdoba must also be punished in Burgos. Heresy cannot be regional. It must be a universal offense. This is what distinguishes the Spanish Inquisition from older forms of ecclesiastical justice. It functions like a government, not just a court. It unifies belief by centralizing surveillance. In a letter from Salamanca, a tribunal notes increased interest among university students in studying texts written by Muslim mathematicians. While not banned, the trend is monitored. Knowledge that originates from non-Christian sources is always suspect, especially when it touches upon the cosmos or the nature of time. Astrology in particular has become a growing concern, not because it's heretical by definition, but because it can lead to theological error. Suggesting that fate is written in the stars, not by divine will, is a direct threat to church authority. Tomas adds this to a growing list. He is compiling a personal index of intellectual trends, mapping where certain ideas are surfacing and how they evolve over time. This is not required by his office. It is something he does on his own. He believes heresy, like disease, moves through patterns. It spreads silently at first, then mutates. If one watches carefully, the mutations can be predicted. By mid-morning, a visitor arrives, a wealthy merchant from a prominent family. He is not under investigation. He is here to make a donation. Gold, parchment, and a small crate of imported books, all for the monastery's archives. On the surface, this is a charitable act, but Tomas knows the subtext. It is an offering of loyalty, a way of saying, remember that I support your work. Should my name ever appear in a rumor, may this favor speak on my behalf. The Inquisition doesn't take bribes, but it remembers kindness. And those memories can be useful. Tomas accepts the donation with the same expression he uses for judgment, still, calm, unreadable. He thanks the man, records the items, and sends a scribe to catalog the books. Later, in private, he will skim them himself. Not all forbidden texts are banned. Some are merely watched, tolerated in controlled environments. And for Tomas, reading them is not pleasure, it is reconnaissance. After noon prayers, a report arrives from the rural village under observation, the one where a family was accused of secret Jewish mourning practices. The junior inquisitor notes the family's behavior is normal if careful. They attend Massachusetts. They make the sign of the cross. But several neighbors have said the same phrase, they seem too perfect. That phrase is always a red flag. Overcorrection often indicates guilt or at least fear of being seen. Tomas writes a reply with care. No arrests. No formal charges. But a request, have a trusted parish priest invite the family to a local feast. Observe who they speak with, what they eat, whether they refuse any foods, especially pork or shellfish. Heresy often reveals itself in what is avoided, not just what is done. Later in the afternoon, the scribe assigned to catalog the merchant's donated books returns with a question. One of the texts is written in Latin but appears to be a translation of an original Greek work attributed to Origen, an early church father who was later declared heretical in some of his teachings. The content is theological musings on the nature of resurrection and the soul's journey after death. Not explicitly forbidden, but on the watch list. Tomas takes the book himself. He will review it tonight. Not just for signs of deviation, but for understanding. He does not fear ideas. He fears their misuse. Many within the Holy Office are content to burn what they do not understand. But Tomas believes that knowing the enemy's mind is the only way to defend against it. He would never admit this openly, but there are lines of Origen, even of Aristotle, that resonate with him not in contradiction to faith, but as a kind of reflection. Sometimes heresy looks like truth wearing the wrong clothes. Before dusk, he walks alone in the archive hall again. He finds a file from a case long closed, a woman who had confessed to nothing but was convicted nonetheless. The evidence was circumstantial. A candle in the wrong place, a word misheard. Tomas reads the verdict. The language is absolute, she offered no defense. Therefore, she must be guilty. He pauses, rereads it, then closes the file and returns it to the shelf. He is not disturbed by the verdict, but the confidence of its language troubles him. The day ends as it began, with silence, reports, and the distant hum of the monastery bell calling the city to vespers. Tomas does not attend. Instead, he remains in his study, the old book in his hands, the ink from today's report still drying. Outside, the sky turns black over Toledo. Families eat. Children sleep. Doors are locked. Somewhere, perhaps, someone is speaking a word in the wrong tongue or praying in a way their ancestors did. They may think no one notices, but the Holy Office does. It may not act today, but it will remember. And in the morning, the names will come again. The following morning arrives colder than usual. A pale sky hangs above the city, and even the birds seem quieter. The stone corridors of the monastery hold the chill. Tomas feels it as he moves through them, the air pressing against his skin like a memory he can't name. But cold never delays the work. Today, the tribunal reconvenes for a matter both simple and dangerous, the confirmation of sentencing for a man found guilty of heretical blasphemy. The man's name is Sebastián Ortega, a blacksmith's apprentice. 23 years old. His crime, on paper, is brief, public statements denying the sanctity of the Virgin Mary and the claim that sin is a human invention designed to control the weak. These were overheard in a tavern, repeated by at least 3 witnesses, and then confirmed by the accused himself in questioning. There was no torture. No need. He admitted everything without resistance, even elaborated. He spoke not with arrogance, but with detachment, as if the words were not meant to provoke, only to exist. That made him more dangerous. Now he awaits formal sentencing. The chamber is small, solemn. No public gallery. This is not an autodafé. It's a legal formality, the final step before punishment. A table. A scribe. 3 inquisitors. And the accused, flanked by guards, hands bound but not trembling. Tomas does not look at him until the documents have been read aloud. The words sound sterile, measured. Deviation from doctrine. Denial of dogma. Persistence in error. The phrases are designed to strip the event of feeling. This is how the machine runs, efficiently, impersonally. When it's over, the judgment is clear. The man is sentenced to formal penance, public humiliation, and imprisonment. No execution. He is young. First offense. And most importantly, unrepentant but not influential. He poses no threat to the wider public unless he speaks again. The tribunal's decision is designed not only to punish but to instruct. A slow erosion of resistance rather than immediate eradication. After the sentencing, Tomas returns to his study and records the outcome. He then spends 2 hours reviewing older penitential orders, comparing the severity of punishments across different provinces. He's looking for patterns, inconsistencies in how justice is applied. Not to correct them, to understand them. The Inquisition must appear unified, but behind that illusion it adapts constantly to local pressure. What is punished in Toledo might be ignored in Valencia unless a pattern emerges. In the afternoon, a courier from Burgos arrives with troubling news. A recent autodafé had been interrupted by a crowd of hecklers. No violence, but noise. Disruption. Jeering. The report is vague on the details, but clear in tone. The spectacle is beginning to lose its hold. Fear is still present, but awe is diminishing. Tomas reads it carefully. Spectacle is a tool. Without it, the Inquisition becomes invisible. And what people cannot see, they begin to doubt. He writes a response advising stronger coordination with local parishes. Sermons must reinforce the sacred nature of the tribunal. Priests must speak of heresy not just as sin, but as infection. The public must not only fear judgment, they must fear association. This is how faith is enforced through society, not by burning thousands, but by isolating one and making others look away. By evening, his desk is covered in ink-stained parchment. He's read 4 case summaries, signed 3 orders, dictated 5 letters. He hasn't eaten. He doesn't notice. Hunger fades when the work consumes. But today, unlike others, he allows himself a moment of reflection. He walks to the chapel. Not for service. For silence. It's empty. Candles flicker, casting trembling shadows across the vaulted ceiling. The air smells of wax and dust and something older, time itself. He sits in the last row, alone. He thinks not of doctrine, but of the people he's sentenced. Not their names, those blur. Their faces. That's what stays. A merchant who stared into the floor while apologizing for lighting Sabbath candles. A woman who cried not for herself but for her children. A priest who tried to explain why he spoke of God's mercy too often. Tomas remembers them all, not as sinners, but as mirrors. Every person brought before him carries a piece of the same tension he carries within. Doubt wrapped in obedience. Silence masking belief. But he tells himself, as he always does, that the burden is holy. That judgment is a form of service. That doubt, left unpunished, becomes doctrine in disguise. That night he dreams of fire, not the flames of execution. He rarely witnesses those himself, but symbolic fire. A torch burning alone in a cave. Books turning to ash without heat. Eyes reflecting orange light in the dark. When he wakes, he remembers none of it clearly. Only the feeling, warmth without comfort. He rises before dawn. The candle from last night still smolders on his desk. He snuffs it out with his fingers. A drop of wax clings to his skin. He does not flinch. Another day waits. Another set of names. Another silence to fill with judgment. The air in Toledo is heavy with anticipation. Not from weather or war, but from something subtler, a tightening of the invisible strings that guide behavior. Word has spread through the merchant streets and parish corners that another autodafé is being prepared. There is no date yet, no official announcement, but the signs are always the same. Increased activity near the tribunal. More movement in and out of the prison halls. Priests speaking vaguely about the cleansing fire in Sunday sermons. People understand without being told. And most importantly, they remember their place. Father Tomas walks through the outer courtyard before sunrise, listening to the quiet. The ground is wet with dew, the stones darkened by it. He moves with practiced calm, every step part of a daily rhythm sharpened over years. His thoughts are not on breakfast or comfort, they are already on the list of names that will be reviewed today and on how best to structure what must follow, the next public sentencing, a carefully choreographed ritual of guilt, penance, and spectacle. In his study, 3 folders are laid out on the desk before he even arrives. A scribe has chosen them from a longer list. The accused are all eligible for public confession. Not death, not torture, not yet, but the theater of repentance performed in front of thousands. These events are not merely judicial. They are performative acts of power designed to remind the city who speaks for God and what happens when others try to speak in his place. The first case is a widow in her 40s, accused of consulting a healer to cure her son's seizures. The healer was not licensed, and the treatment, a combination of herbs, murmured phrases, and moonlit rituals, walks the line between medicine and superstition. Her defense is simple: desperation. She claims the church offered her prayers but not solutions. The boy was suffering. She acted as any mother would. Her honesty, while sincere, is her weakness. It confirms everything they need. Tomas notes that she did not attempt to hide the ritual. That suggests either arrogance or ignorance, both dangerous in different ways. The second case is a young notary's assistant who copied several controversial texts by hand, including fragments of ancient Roman poetry and a treatise on the soul that suggests morality is culturally relative. He claims he did it for study, that the texts were already owned by his employer, that he added nothing. But the act of copying is considered transmission, a form of silent agreement. The Inquisition punishes such things not because they are loud, but because they are quiet. Ideas pass through ink travel farther than voices ever can. The third is a friar from a monastery on the edge of the province. He has been under quiet surveillance for nearly 2 years and only now has enough evidence accumulated to bring his actions to light. His sermons, though passionate, have been described as too merciful. He rarely speaks of damnation. He focuses on grace. He has been known to say that even the worst sinner may reach heaven, which, though technically not heresy, contradicts the tone the Inquisition promotes. The charge is subtle, spiritual leniency interpreted as doctrinal weakness. His presence at the auto da fe would be symbolic, a reminder that even clergy are not beyond correction. Tomas marks all 3 for public penance. He writes the orders in longhand, carefully, without emotion. Their punishments are not executions. They will wear garments of shame, carry candles, and speak memorized confessions. The crowd will watch. Children will ask questions. Older men will nod solemnly. It will be a lesson disguised as ritual. The fire may not touch them, but it will warm the eyes of those who need reminding. The rest of the day is devoted to logistics. Organizing which priests will escort the accused. Which streets the procession will follow. How the sermon will be shaped. Even where the local vendors may set up their stalls because an auto da fe, for all its severity, has become an event. People attend with the same strange enthusiasm they show for religious festivals. They eat, they watch, they nod with relief that it is not their name being spoken aloud. This is the duality the Inquisition cultivates, terror made palatable through repetition. By late afternoon, Tomas meets with the Dominican preacher assigned to deliver the central homily during the ceremony. They speak not of scripture, but of tone. The message must be controlled. Too much fire, and the people recoil. Too much mercy, and they forget the cost. The preacher is young, but understands this balance. He suggests anchoring the sermon around the image of the shepherd's crook, firm but guiding. Tomas approves. It is a subtle metaphor, and the crowd will understand it in whatever way suits them. That evening, as the last light fades over the tiled roofs of Toledo, Tomas walks alone through the prison wing. He doesn't speak to the prisoners. He watches. Some sit in silence. Others pray. A few weep softly so as not to disturb the thin veil of calm that blankets the cells. In one corner, a man whispers scripture under his breath, over and over like a chant to ward off darkness. None of them know if they will walk out or burn. That uncertainty is intentional. It keeps them quiet. It keeps them pliable. Tomas stops before one cell and looks in. It is the widow. She is not crying. Her face is pale but composed. Her eyes are open. She is waiting. He watches for a long moment, then turns and walks away. He does not feel pity. He feels clarity. He believes her penance will serve a purpose, not just for her, but for the audience that will see her lowered eyes, her rough robe, the crack in her voice as she confesses what she does not believe was wrong. Because in this world, belief is not enough. Compliance must be visible. Faith must be public. The stars emerge and the city dims. In the silence, the preparations continue. And somewhere, behind a closed door, a child asks why people wear black robes when they walk through the streets without speaking. And a mother answers gently that it is better not to ask such things. In the days that follow, the city begins to shift. Subtly at first. Blacksmiths complete their work faster. Market vendors speak with quieter voices. Students leave books closed unless directly questioned. The announcement of the upcoming auto-da-fe spreads not by decree but by tone, the way parish priests linger longer at the end of Mass, the way officials walk in pairs, and how scribes are seen carrying papers with seals never usually exposed to public view. It does not matter when the actual date is named. The ritual has already begun in the minds of the people. Tomas oversees every detail with the precision of a surgeon. He knows the strength of the Inquisition is not simply in what it punishes, but in how it is seen to punish. This is a performance, yes, but one written in blood, faith, and fear. If any part of it seems too casual, too arbitrary, the entire illusion of divine order begins to unravel. It is not just about the guilt of the accused, it is about the conviction of the watchers. He spends the first hours of the morning in the cathedral not in prayer, but in inspection. The platform has been raised. The pews cleared for the special procession. A tall wooden cross stands behind the speaker's podium. It is wrapped in black cloth now, to be unveiled only on the morning of the ceremony. Behind it, a banner will hang bearing the phrase taken from Scripture, "For our God is a consuming fire." Every element is symbolic. Every position matters. The condemned will be brought in wearing the sabanito, the garment of public penance. It is a simple tunic marked with a cross or flame depending on the charge. Those assigned lighter sentences will carry candles. Those whose punishment is death will wear mitred hats painted with images of demons or the flames of hell. These images are not simply decoration. They are tools. Visual theology for a mostly illiterate population. Tomas walks along the edge of the cathedral's nave, considering angles of sight and acoustics. The sermon must be heard by everyone, even those who come only out of curiosity. He speaks briefly with the choir director about the music, slow, solemn chants drawn from the Psalms. No triumph. No joy, only gravity. The goal is not celebration. It is warning. Back in the monastery, preparations continue. The scribes are transcribing the final statements of the accused. Not their actual confessions, which are rarely read aloud, but the refined versions shaped by the tribunal. These are public texts constructed to serve as examples. The words must show remorse, clarity, and submission to the church. If a condemned individual hesitates, falters, or adds unsanctioned thoughts during the reading, it is recorded. It becomes part of the next hearing. The tribunal never forgets. The widow, the notary's assistant, and the friar have all been given their instructions. Each has been visited by a priest assigned to coach them through the public act of confession. These priests are not judges. They are handlers. Their role is to shape the emotions of the condemned into something palatable and persuasive. Tears are welcome. Silence is not. The best performance is one that confirms the power of repentance and the mercy of the church. The crowd must see that even the damned can be reclaimed if they obey. That afternoon, Tomas meets with two members of the city council. Their concern is not religious, but political. They want to ensure that the event does not disrupt trade. Too many closures could hurt business. Tomas listens politely, assures them that only the main plaza and two adjacent streets will be blocked and that the event will not exceed the afternoon. He knows the balance must be kept. The Inquisition cannot be seen as a burden. It must appear as part of the city's rhythm, predictable, respected, feared, but not resented. Like the tolling of a bell. Once the councilmen leave, Tomas reviews a private letter from a noble family in Seville. It expresses full support for the Holy Office and includes a discreet inquiry about the fate of a cousin recently named in a local case. The message is encoded in courtesy, but the meaning is clear. The Inquisition must decide how visible its impartiality will be. Nobles are punished more rarely, not because they are innocent, but because their punishment must be more carefully staged. The structure survives by managing spectacle, not simply distributing justice. As evening approaches, Tomas meets with his fellow inquisitors for the final rehearsal. They discuss the order of presentation, who walks first, who speaks last, how long each confession should take, how to manage the crowd if unrest brews. Guards are stationed throughout the plaza not to crush violence, but to prevent it from igniting. The fear of being named in return is often enough to ensure quiet obedience. The night before the auto-da-fe, the accused are kept separate. No contact, no visitors, no food, only water. It is not cruelty. It is design. Hunger softens resistance. Solitude quiets anger. They are prepared not only for punishment but for performance. Tomas sits in his cell long after midnight, reviewing the final list. He studies each name again, not to judge, but to memorize. When he speaks their cases aloud tomorrow, he must do so with certainty. Any doubt in his voice could unravel the illusion. This is the final step, alignment of mind and voice. The Inquisitor becomes the vessel of judgment, not its author. He must sound not like himself, but like inevitability. Outside, the city is silent. The stars burn faintly behind clouds. Somewhere, in a locked cell, a mother recites a prayer in the wrong tongue. Somewhere else, a child dreams of fire without knowing why. And in the great stone monastery, the candles slowly die one by one. The morning of the auto-da-fe breaks slowly, the first light barely piercing through the low, gray sky above Toledo. There is no rain, but the air is thick with a heavy stillness, the kind that settles over a city when it's waiting for something solemn. The streets are already being swept. Wooden barriers are being moved into place. The cathedral bell rings earlier than usual, not for prayer, but as a signal. This will be no ordinary day. By mid-morning, the plaza begins to fill. Merchants arrive first, pushing carts to the edges, unsure if they'll be allowed to sell. Children follow, barefoot and curious, tugging at sleeves and whispering questions. Priests arrive in procession, their robes dark and motionless in the breeze. Inquisitors, guards, scribes, all in position. And then the sound changes. The usual hum of conversation drops into silence as the first sight appears. The condemned. They are led in slowly, heads bowed, flanked by guards. Each wears the San Benito, the long penitential robe marked with crosses and symbols indicating their offense. One robe bears a red flame, a sign of formal heresy. Another, a black X across the chest, deviation from doctrine without recantation. They do not resist. Their steps are slow, rehearsed. They have been coached in this movement. Even fear must follow form. The widow walks first. Her robe reaches the ground. Her hands clutch a thick white candle. She looks not at the crowd, but directly at the cross draped above the platform. Behind her comes the friar, eyes lowered but calm. His face shows neither defiance nor surrender, only fatigue. The notary's assistant walks last, smallest in stature, but not visibly shaken. His mouth moves. Whether he's praying or counting is impossible to know. The platform has been prepared to exact specification. There are no surprises. Tomas stands near the central dais, expression unreadable. His robes are plain, dark, marked only with a small cross at the collar. He does not speak yet. That duty belongs to the Dominican preacher, who steps forward and delivers the sermon. A long, rhythmic piece drawn from scripture and tribunal records. He speaks of sin not as rebellion, but as infection. He speaks of penance not as punishment, but as healing. He never raises his voice, but the tone carries. People shift uncomfortably. Some nod, others lower their eyes. Then come the confessions. Each condemned is led forward in turn. They do not speak spontaneously. They read from prepared statements, their voices slow, shaky, but clear. The widow begins with a recitation of guilt. She confesses to consulting forbidden rituals, trusting the wrong hands, placing her son's well-being before her loyalty to the church. The crowd watches, unmoved. Her voice breaks once, at the mention of her son's name. It is noted. The friar follows. His statement is longer. He admits to improper teachings, to elevating mercy over judgment. He reaffirms his loyalty to orthodoxy. He begs the tribunal for the opportunity to be restored. His voice is steady. The crowd does not applaud, but the silence after his words carries weight. Some hear it as dignity, others as manipulation. All of it is remembered. Last is the notary's assistant. He speaks without hesitation, naming the texts he copied, the ideas he misunderstood. He disavows every phrase. He asks forgiveness. He refers to his sin as a misuse of the hands God gave me. The phrase is clever, possibly rehearsed, possibly sincere. It doesn't matter. What matters is the crowd hears submission. Once the confessions are completed, Tomas steps forward to read the sentencing. His voice is formal, not harsh. Each name, each phrase, carries the ring of finality. The widow is sentenced to public penance and exile. She will leave the city within 3 days, never to return. The friar is assigned to a monastery of silence, a lifetime of prayer without speech. The notary's assistant is sent to labor under church supervision, copying only scripture under constant watch. None are executed today. There will be no flames. That too is part of the message. The fire must remain rare to keep its meaning sharp. Mercy, when granted, becomes another form of control. The ceremony ends with a hymn. The choir sings slowly, voices rising through the thick air, the melody heavy with sorrow. It is not celebration. It is conclusion. A chapter closed for now. The condemned are led away, not through the main streets, but through side alleys, disappearing into the city's edges. The crowd disperses in clusters, some whispering, some silent, some satisfied. A few leave early. A few remain to pray. Back inside the tribunal, Tomas removes his robe and returns to his desk. There are already new letters waiting. A report from Avila. A summons from Valencia. A new list of names gathered during the past week. The machine does not rest. He records the details of the ceremony in his ledger. Not the emotional texture, only the facts. Number of attendees. Time of each confession. Reactions from the crowd. Notes on behavior. This record will become part of the archive, filed under the year, sealed with wax, and shelved in the chamber that holds centuries of names, judgments, and erased voices. As the sun dips low and the city exhales, Tomas remains at his desk. He does not reflect. He calculates. How many more names before the end of the year? How many sermons remain to be written? Which of today's spectators will be tomorrow's suspects? Outside, Toledo returns to its rhythm. The plaza is swept. The torches removed. The platform disassembled. But the memory remains. In homes, the words spoken today are repeated in lowered voices. In taverns, eyes glance sideways before asking questions. In churches, the sermons lean harder into obedience. And in the tribunal, the files continue to grow. The days following the auto de fe are deceptively quiet. There are no crowds in the plaza, no drums, no processions of condemned souls in robes of shame. The city exhales as though it has survived something. Life outwardly returns to normal, but beneath that surface, the effect lingers. Shopkeepers speak a little more cautiously. Priests glance longer at their congregations before giving absolution. People choose their words as if someone else is always listening. And in many cases, someone is. For Tomas, this period after public judgment is just as important as the event itself. Punishment, when isolated, only creates fear. But when followed by silence, that loaded, uncertain silence, it creates obedience. It is in the days after the fire that the real control settles in. This is where reputations fracture, alliances shift, families break apart in the name of purification. This is where the Inquisition reaps the long harvest. In the early morning, Tomas receives a sealed report from the network of informants operating quietly across the province. These are not officials or clergy, but ordinary men and women paid or compelled to observe and report. The report includes names. 2 school teachers who have been seen meeting in private and exchanging texts in Latin not commonly approved for use. A wine merchant overheard questioning the doctrine of transubstantiation during a private meal. A scribe who copies both church orders and letters from foreign scholars, showing too much interest in ideas that do not originate from Rome. None of these are cases yet, but they are seeds. Tomas reads the list without emotion, underlining one name. The scribe. Copyists have always been a danger. They are not authors, but they transmit. They spread words like pollen, invisible and everywhere. The danger is not that they believe heresy. It's that they replicate it, sometimes without even understanding what they're preserving. Tomas marks the name for passive surveillance. He wants to know who the scribe visits, what orders he takes, and how he responds to public sermons. Guilt is often revealed in how one listens. Later that morning, a visiting friar from Burgos arrives unannounced. He brings troubling news. In his region, whispers of sympathy for the condemned have begun to emerge. Not loudly, not in defiance, but quietly, in homes and letters. Questions, mostly. Why was the friar punished for preaching mercy? Why was the widow exiled instead of offered help? Why does the church punish desperation? These are not accusations, but they are more dangerous. Questions are seeds, too. Tomas listens. He does not react. He assures the friar that the Holy Office is already aware of the mood and will respond in time. What he doesn't say is that these murmurs are expected. Every performance invites interpretation. The goal of the auto de fe was not to silence all doubt, but to confuse it, to make belief and fear indistinguishable. If people question in private, that is acceptable, even useful, as long as they do not act. Surveillance can manage questions. Action must be crushed. The rest of the day is spent drafting letters to the regional tribunals, reinforcing the need for consistency in sentencing and messaging. Heresy must not be regionalized. The widow's case, the friar's reassignment, the assistant's re-education. These outcomes must be mirrored when similar offenses arise elsewhere. Otherwise, the perception of justice weakens. Tomas includes a copy of the sermon given during the auto de fe, recommending it for repetition in other cities. Words, like fire, must be shared to burn evenly. In the afternoon, he meets with the local bishop in a closed room. The bishop is cautious, but respectful. He has heard that a nobleman's son has begun hosting gatherings where philosophical texts are discussed. Nothing formal, no doctrines denied, just questions asked. The bishop doesn't want to act without evidence, but he also doesn't want trouble to grow. He asks Tomas what should be done. Tomas responds carefully. Nobles require delicacy. The gatherings should not be interrupted, not yet. Instead, someone trusted must attend them quietly, posing as a fellow student of ideas. Their purpose is not to accuse, but to listen. Heresy often reveals itself not in the words spoken, but in the comfort with which they are said. If the host speaks without fear, it means he believes he is safe. That belief must be corrected. As evening sets in, Tomas returns to his study. He reviews the transcripts of recent interrogations. Most are unremarkable denials, apologies, formulaic expressions of faith. But one stands out. A girl, aged 16, arrested after her employer claimed she refused to recite the Lord's Prayer. In questioning, she did not cry. She did not shout. She simply repeated, "It is not for me to say those words." No explanation. No resistance. Just a calm refusal. Tomas reads the transcript twice. He does not yet know what to make of it. She might be a convert who never fully adopted Christian rituals. Or she may belong to a family who practices an older form of silent worship, one that rejects formula and favors inner purity. He orders a second round of questioning, not harsher, but deeper. He wants to know how she was raised. Who taught her to think silence was enough? Before night falls, he walks through the outer corridors of the monastery where the wind passes between the stones like breath through a flute. The torches flicker. Somewhere in the distance, bells ring for evening Massachusetts. He does not go. He returns to his study, closes the door, and writes in his private journal, not the official ledger, but the one he never shows. It is filled with questions he never asks aloud. Not doubts. Observations. Notes on people, patterns, strange silences that do not fit the expected model of sin. He writes only one sentence tonight: faith survives in silence more often than we expect. Then he closes the journal, extinguishes the candle, and sits for a while in the dark. The following morning, the monastery is washed in cold, white light. A faint mist lingers over the inner courtyard, giving the stone columns a pale, spectral hue. Tomas walks through it before sunrise, as he always does, silent and alone. The rhythm of his movements never changes, but the purpose behind them shifts. Each day now, the files grow. Each day, more names are written, some to be questioned, others only to be remembered for later. The Inquisition is not a fire that consumes everything at once. It is a slow burn, moving deliberately, precisely. And Tomas is its architect. Today is not for spectacle. Today is for the quieter acts of power. The kind that move behind locked doors, between sealed letters, within thoughts never spoken aloud. His first task is to meet with a monk from Salamanca, sent to share concerns from the university. The monk is elderly, frail in frame, but sharp in tone. He speaks of a subtle shift among students, especially those studying natural philosophy and ancient languages. They have begun to ask whether moral law is absolute or if it can change with time. Some quote Aristotle too freely. Others admire texts not found in any church-approved syllabus. One group has reportedly begun studying Maimonides in private, using coded language to disguise their discussions. Tomas listens. He asks few questions. He already knows the pattern. Ideas always begin in the academy. Not as heresies, but as questions, footnotes, murmured comparisons between one school of thought and another. He writes the names of 3 students mentioned by the monk as well as the name of the instructor who allows such freedom to bloom. None are to be arrested. That would be premature. Instead, informants will be placed in the classroom. Essays will be copied. Sermons in that region will shift subtly toward warnings against intellectual vanity. Later that morning, a report arrives from the monastery's archivist. He has reviewed several books left in donation by a now-deceased nobleman. Most are harmless, psalms, glossaries, collections of sermons. But 2 volumes raise concerns. One is a poetic retelling of the Book of Genesis written in Castilian rather than Latin and notably omitting references to divine punishment. The other is a handwritten manuscript containing meditations on Christ's humanity with a tone more philosophical than devotional. Neither are banned, but both are now flagged. Tomas reads the manuscript himself, late in the morning, sitting in the archive chamber where light filters in through narrow windows cut deep into thick stone walls. The writing is elegant, the tone sincere. It does not mock doctrine. It simply approaches it from the side, asking how God can be both fully divine and fully human without tearing the meaning of each word in half. Tomas finishes reading in silence. He does not smile. He does not frown. He returns the manuscript to the table and marks it, detained in restricted archive. It will not be destroyed, but it will not be read again except by those trusted with the burden of contradiction. By midday, Tomas receives word that the girl who refused to recite the Lord's Prayer has been questioned again. The priest who conducted the session reports that she remains silent on most points, though she did reveal that her grandmother taught her a form of prayer not using words. She claims this is how her family honored God, in stillness, in behavior, in intention. There is no evidence of Jewish or Islamic practice. No books, no rituals, just this idea of faith without form. Tomas reflects. This is not rebellion. It is something older. A kind of mysticism, perhaps, passed down in whispers too fragmented to trace, too silent to accuse. But still dangerous. Silence resists correction. You cannot argue with what is not said. He orders the girl held under observation but not tortured. No public confession. No trial. He wants her to disappear into the silence she believes in. Some punishments are best when they leave no scars. That afternoon, another letter arrives. This one from Valencia. A tribunal has begun investigating a convent where the nuns are reportedly practicing unauthorized fasts and performing acts of self-flagellation without ecclesiastical oversight. The concern is not the acts themselves, but their motivation. A group within the convent believes they are receiving direct visions from the Virgin Mary. One nun claims she has been told to seek the purifying flame. Visions, especially among women, are suspect. They blur the line between holiness and heresy too easily. Saints and madwomen share too many symptoms. Tomas responds with instruction: delay formal charges. Send a visiting cleric to live among the sisters, quietly, and report on their speech, sleep, and signs of possible manipulation. Religious ecstasy can be genuine, or it can be an excuse. Either way, it must be weighed not by intensity but by orthodoxy. As the sun lowers, the city begins to glow in gold and red. Evening bells ring. People return home. Children run through the narrow alleys with sticks, their games filled with laughter that briefly makes the old stones feel less heavy. Tomas watches from a window in the monastery's south wall. He does not hate the city. He simply no longer belongs to it. He lives beside it, within its frame but outside its rhythm. Back in his study, he lights a candle and opens the latest delivery from Rome. A short collection of recent papal decrees. One passage speaks of vigilantia perpetua, the eternal vigilance required of the Church's defenders. Tomas underlines the phrase. He knows it well. It is his creed, even if he did not choose it. As the flame flickers, he begins composing his weekly summary for the Suprema in Madrid. He writes in precise, unemotional language. 6 new cases opened. 3 closed. 1 manuscript confiscated. Surveillance increased in Salamanca. A girl in custody, not for what she said, but for what she refuses to say. When the candle burns low, he closes the file, stands, and extinguishes the flame. Outside, the city sleeps. Inside, the tribunal waits. The silence of the night inside the monastery is different from the silence outside its walls. Outside, the city sleeps in warmth and weariness. Inside, silence is cultivated. It has weight. It is never empty. Every stone corridor and wooden door carries with it the expectation of stillness, as if sound itself might be a transgression. Tomas wakes before dawn again, as he always does, though today with a deeper tension sitting beneath his ribs, not fear, not dread, but something harder to define. It is the pressure of something unseen, the sense that a change is beginning somewhere just out of reach. This morning begins not with paperwork or patrols but with a private meeting. A cardinal has arrived in Toledo from the capital, not announced, not in procession, but by quiet entrance and under heavy cloak. His carriage bore no marks. His retinue small. But his presence means something. The Holy Office does not send cardinals to monasteries unless it requires discretion. And urgency. They meet in the inner cloister, shielded from ears and wind. The cardinal speaks calmly, but the weight of his words is unmistakable. There is a growing concern among high clergy that heretical thought is no longer isolated. What had once been individual deviations, personal errors, cultural relics, unrepentant converts is now starting to take shape as something more organized. The whispers from the university, the quiet gatherings among nobility, the increased interest in foreign texts, these are no longer isolated incidents. They are symptoms. Rome fears Spain may become vulnerable not to rebellion of sword or banner, but of ink, of ideas. Tomas listens, his hands folded before him. The cardinal continues. There is talk of a foreign printer's work being smuggled across the Pyrenees. The works are subtle, not manifestos, not open defiance, but philosophical texts that introduce the idea of relative truth, of conscience as personal rather than collective. In a land where faith has been engineered to serve as glue for the crown and the church, such notions are not merely dangerous, they are revolutionary. The cardinal hands Tomas a sealed envelope. Inside are names. 5 men. 2 are professors. 1 is a former military officer turned tutor for a minor noble. The other 2 are members of a trade guild in Barcelona who have begun hosting discussion circles. The cardinal's instruction is not immediate arrest. It is something more difficult. Observation. Mapping. He wants to know not just what they say, but how far their influence reaches. Whether they are nodes in a larger network or merely drifting sparks. After the cardinal leaves, Tomas returns to his study and does what he always does in moments of subtle crisis. He writes. Not to the tribunal. Not in any formal report. He writes privately, charting connections between known heresies and the evolving language of dissent. He sketches a model in the margin of his paper, a branching tree, not of sin, but of doubt. At the root is solitude. At the trunk, fear. But at the edges of the branches, he writes one word 3 times, intellectus. Understanding. This, he believes, is the heresy of the New Age. Not blasphemy. Not secret prayer. But the belief that one can know God personally without structure. Without intercession. Without fear. By late morning, Tomas moves to more routine matters. A trial is scheduled in the coming days, though not a public one. The accused is a well-placed clerk in a noble household charged with forging baptismal certificates for families suspected of concealing their ancestral faith. The man admits to the act, but claims it was done under pressure. He says he feared for his position, that the household required silence and rewarded loyalty. He insists he does not believe in the old rites himself. Tomas knows this is probably true. But it doesn't matter. The act itself is betrayal. Not just of the faith, but of the system. The Inquisition does not tolerate those who make heresy easier to hide. If left unpunished, such behavior invites others to bend the rules to excuse complicity. The trial will be swift. The punishment mild in appearance, exile, perhaps, but severe in consequence. The clerk's name will be marked. His future ruined. The family he served will be quietly warned. Power will be preserved and the cost paid in obscurity. In the afternoon, Tomas visits the chamber of confiscated texts. It is a small, locked room where writings deemed unfit for public access are held. Not destroyed, not unless explicitly banned, but frozen. Held in stasis. The room smells of parchment, dust, and ink thick with age. On the shelves are scrolls, codices, leaflets. Some contain prayers in Hebrew. Others hold fragments of Greek logic. A few are works of Christian mysticism that drifted too far from accepted theology. Tomas takes down one volume, a collection of writings from a 13th century Andalusian philosopher who tried to reconcile faith with reason. The pages are careful, not provocative. But they ask questions: can God be known through mathematics? Does nature reflect the mind of the divine or merely its shadow? Tomas reads until his eyes blur. He does not feel danger in the words. He feels longing. But longing has no place in law. He replaces the book, locks the door, and does not record the visit. As night falls, he returns to his journal. He writes fewer words tonight. The page remains half empty. But he writes one sentence, slowly, deliberately. It is not the fire that frightens them, but the idea that it may one day no longer be necessary. Then he closes the book, steps to the window, and watches the city once again fold itself into darkness. The monastery does not change with the seasons in any visible way. Its stone walls are constant, immune to the slow march of months. Outside, the orchards shift from green to gold. Inside, the rhythm remains fixed: prayer, judgment, silence. But Tomas feels the weight of time not in the air or the trees, but in the documents that accumulate on his desk, layers of history day by day, binding the present more tightly to the past. It is early autumn now. The city has cooled, the heat of summer gone, replaced with mornings that bite at the edge of the robe. In the distance, smoke rises not from bonfires or punishment, but from homes preparing for longer nights. The streets are quieter. Not out of fear, not this time, but out of routine. The last auto-da-fe has receded into memory. But memory in the city does not fade. It layers. Tomas begins the morning in review. The tribunal has received new correspondence from Zaragoza, where a sudden influx of foreign merchants has stirred questions about unsanctioned practices and prayers spoken in strange tongues. The letter is cautious. No direct accusations, only reports that during feast days, several households remained closed to public worship. That unfamiliar scripts have been seen in ledgers and margins. That a child refused to say grace at a communal meal. None of this is proof. But in the architecture of inquisitorial logic, proof is never the beginning, it is the end. The process begins with pattern. With the subtle. With suspicion that repeats. Tomas writes a brief reply. Acknowledge. Observe. Delay action. He wants more. Names. Timelines. Not because he doubts the reports, but because he understands that overreach ruins rhythm. Fear must feel rational to last. He spends the remainder of the morning examining two cases that have arrived with conflicting witness accounts. In both, the accused are elderly. In both, the accusations come from within their own families. One is a grandmother accused by her daughter-in-law of reciting blessings in a language no one could identify. The other, an old man who buries scraps of bread under his floor and tells his grandchildren they are gifts for angels. Tomas reads the testimonies carefully. These are not acts of resistance. They are echoes, cultural memory resurfacing through habit, not ideology. And yet, he knows from experience that habit can keep heresy alive long after belief has faded. He marks the grandmother for questioning, but in private, and orders no torture. He marks the old man as non-threatening, but insists that his house be watched. The point is not always to punish. Sometimes it is enough to ensure a ritual dies in silence. At midday, the city bell rings longer than usual. A funeral procession passes beneath the windows of the monastery, a nobleman's son, fallen to illness. The cortege moves slowly, priests in white and mourners veiled. Tomas watches from above unseen. He does not mourn, but he notes the pageantry. The church is present in every moment of life, from birth to death, but it is moments like these, when power and ritual combine, that sustain its hold. After the procession, he walks alone through the outer cloister. Leaves have begun to fall in scattered curls along the stone floor. The light shifts differently now, bending lower, stretching shadows longer. He stops by a niche in the wall where an inscription has nearly faded away. No one remembers who carved it or when. It reads only, Nulla fides sine timor. No faith without fear. Tomas considers that phrase often. It is a foundation of his work. But lately he has begun to wonder whether fear, once installed, ever truly leaves. Does it linger, even after the mind repents? Do those judged ever truly believe again, or do they simply perform belief well enough to avoid punishment? Back in his study, he receives a new report from the silent monastery where the friar from the last auto-da-fe was sent. It notes his behavior as compliant, quiet, cooperative. But there is a note that during nighttime prayers, he does not always move his lips. That in group chants, his voice is soft, almost indistinguishable from the wind. It is not refusal, but it is not submission either. Tomas reads the note several times, then writes a single instruction in the margin, continue observation. No contact. Later, in the early dusk, a traveling bookseller is brought to the tribunal by a city official. The man is not under arrest, only held for questioning. Among his wares was a small printed pamphlet written in verse comparing the rise and fall of empires to the movement of stars. The language is poetic, but some phrases imply a cyclical nature to history, a concept the Inquisition finds dangerous as it undermines divine providence. If empires rise and fall by their own patterns, where is the hand of God? Tomas speaks briefly with the official, reviews the pamphlet, and orders all copies confiscated. The bookseller is warned but released. The pamphlet is added to the archive of questionable texts. Not heretical, not illegal, but suggestive. It will be read again in the future if the ideas it carries spread. This is how the Holy Office governs not just words but momentum. That night, as darkness settles and the monastery descends into ordered silence, Tomas remains at his desk long after candles have burned low. He reads old reports. Not from his own city, but from Seville, where a woman once confessed not to practicing witchcraft but to wanting to believe in it simply because it offered answers the church would not. Her words were hesitant, fragmented, but honest. He remembers her file. She was sentenced to spiritual rehabilitation. Her final outcome never recorded. Tomas closes the report and looks out his window at the empty city square. He does not pray. He does not write. He simply watches. And in that quiet moment, he realizes something unsettling. Heresy, in its most dangerous form, is not rebellion. It is longing. The days grow shorter. The chill creeps into the monastery's stone halls more quickly now, settling in before Vespers and staying through the morning bells. Candles are lit earlier. Robes are worn thicker. The seasons turn without asking permission. But for the Inquisition, time is not measured in hours or weather. It is measured in confessions, reports, and the slow, invisible shift of belief. And something is shifting. Tomas wakes before the bells. His routine unchanged. He lights the lamp in his study with practiced fingers, the flame flickering against shelves of bound records. Everything in the room has a place. Files aligned by date. Quills trimmed and set in rows. He believes in order. It is the shape he gives to the chaos of human thought. Yet even here, beneath the surface of precision, disorder has begun to stir. The first report of the day is brief. A confession. A young novice in a nearby convent has admitted under pressure that she no longer believes prayer reaches heaven. She says she continues the rituals out of duty, not conviction. She fears she is only mouthing words. Her superiors were divided, some wanted her expelled, others reassigned. The report was sent to the tribunal not for sentencing, but for guidance. Tomas reads the account twice. He notes the absence of defiance. The girl is not challenging the church. She's lost within it. There's no heresy, only silence where certainty once lived. He writes a note, no punishment. Recommend extended spiritual formation. Avoid public notice. This is the kind of fracture the Holy Office must manage carefully. Too much force and cracks become collapses. Gentle pressure can realign what might otherwise decay. He turns next to a growing stack of parchment gathered by the scribes. Lists of names submitted by anonymous accusers. Most are mundane. Whispered complaints, bad attendance at mass, foreign languages overheard, strange gestures made over food. Some are clearly spiteful, neighbors turning on neighbors, relatives looking for revenge. Tomas has read hundreds of such lists. He knows how to weigh them. The key is not in the accusations themselves, but in the repetition. If a name appears once, it may be coincidence. If it appears 3 times from unrelated sources, it becomes inevitable. This morning, one such name stands out. A physician from a family recently moved from Córdoba. He has been observed avoiding public feast days, reading texts in Arabic, and hosting private dinners where only selected guests are invited. No direct heretical statements, but patterns. The kinds of patterns that, left unchecked, grow bold. Tomas does not order arrest. He orders a copyist to gather records on the man's movements, his patience, his books. The Inquisition does not need to act loudly to be feared. A letter sent, a question asked, a delay in approval, these are enough to create tremors. Later, a courier arrives with a message from the capital. The Suprema has requested an update on the broader efforts to combat the slow drift of secular thought creeping into the universities and noble courts. The letter is polite but urgent. It notes increased concern from Rome that the Spanish model of enforcement, so long praised for its severity, may be losing its edge. Heresies are not being spoken more loudly. They are being spoken more cleverly, wrapped in allegory, delivered through art, hidden in the structure of metaphors. They are no longer designed to rebel. They are designed to survive. Tomas sits with this letter for a long time. He does not answer it immediately. Instead, he opens a drawer and removes a collection of older interrogations cases from over a decade ago when the accused would still break under pressure, would scream out names, would beg to be reconciled. Those cases have become rarer. Now, the accused often remain quiet. They speak less, confess less. Some even seem to accept their fate without resistance. This is not progress. This is evolution. Heresy is learning how to wait. By the afternoon, Tomas is reading a new treatise recently submitted for theological review. It is not subversive. In fact, it's filled with orthodox praise and proper citations. But something in the tone catches him. The writer discusses grace not as a divine mystery but as a social instrument, a method of behavioral guidance. It is subtle, buried in paragraphs of praise. But the implication is dangerous. If grace is seen as a tool, it becomes negotiable. And once grace is negotiable, the whole edifice begins to shift. He writes a recommendation for the text to be returned with suggested edits. Nothing formal. Nothing accusatory. Just a gentle correction in tone. He knows the writer will comply. The threat is never mentioned. But it is understood. As night approaches, Tomas returns to the chapel. Not for prayer, but to observe. The room is empty but not cold. Candles burn along the altar. The scent of wax and incense clings to the wooden pews. He walks slowly, passing the statues of saints, figures carved to be unmoving, yet always watching. He stops before one, St. Peter, keys in hand. The guardian of heaven. The first pope. The fisherman-turned-judge. Tomas wonders, not for the first time, how much Peter truly understood when he was given the keys. Whether he saw the weight they would carry. Whether he could have imagined centuries later, men in black robes judging others in his name. Whether he would have wanted it. He leaves the chapel without kneeling. Back in his room, he writes no journal entry. The candle burns lower than usual. Outside, the wind has picked up, sweeping across the rooftops with a sound like breath between confession and denial. In the hall beyond, a young novice passes his door in silence. She carries a tray of bread and water to the cells where 2 new prisoners wait. Tomas does not know their names yet, but he will. Tomorrow they will be questioned. And in time, they will be either corrected, forgotten, or remembered in the ledgers where belief is counted in ink. The questioning begins before sunrise. 2 new prisoners, both arrested on suspicion, not proof. Their names were mentioned in separate reports, both anonymous, both vague. One is a young man employed as a translator for a merchant firm trading across the Mediterranean. The other, a woman from the outskirts of Toledo, known in her parish for aiding the sick, though she is not trained nor sanctioned by the church. No overt heresy. No confession yet. Just the beginnings of patterns of potential. That is often enough. Tomas does not attend the initial interrogations. These are handled by lower officials whose task is not to break the spirit but to uncover inconsistency. He reads the transcripts afterward, line by line. The young man is calm. Measured. He admits to reading Arabic and Italian, explains that his work requires it. When asked whether he prays, he simply says he does not always attend Mass because his work takes him far from the city. He insists he believes in the Church's teachings, but his words are careful. Too careful. Truth rarely wears armor unless it expects to be attacked. The woman's account is more complicated. She speaks with conviction, insists she has done no harm. She claims the herbs she uses are common knowledge passed down through generations. She denies any invocation of spirits or saints outside those recognized by the Church. But when asked why she never sought approval for her healing, she answers because God gave the gift freely. That phrase is marked, not for defiance, but for independence. Tomas reads both files twice. He makes no immediate decision. He instead places their names into a list of cases that require deeper questioning, not of the body, but of belief. These are the cases where truth is not revealed by pain, but by time. By watching what someone says when they are no longer certain who is listening. The rest of the day moves with methodical purpose. A letter from Seville reports the closure of a small circle of suspected conversos, Jews converted to Christianity, now accused of holding private fasts during Lent. No arrests made yet. The tribunal there is cautious as it involves a family connected to several prominent business ties. Tomas replies with a coded phrase used between inquisitors, hold the roots, not the leaves. It means do not strike yet. Study. Document. See who else is fed by the same soil. In the late afternoon, Tomas reviews a complaint from a bishop in Galicia disturbed by the increasing popularity of a traveling preacher who emphasizes personal revelation over institutional instruction. The man speaks in public squares, avoids formal sermons, and encourages those listening to seek the whisper of God within. This kind of teaching is seductive not because it opposes the Church openly, but because it shifts the center of authority inward. If God can be found in silence, then who needs the confessional? If the divine speaks directly, then what use is the priest? Tomas sends no reply that day. He instead walks through the courtyard beneath stone arches that have held the weight of 1,000 such decisions. He passes novice monks at study, their heads bowed over texts that once were forbidden, now approved, not because they became safer, but because the church learned how to frame them. Back in his study, he writes a short entry in the private journal. Today he does not speak of cases. He writes a question: how long does it take for a belief to die once it is no longer spoken aloud? Then he adds underneath it, and does silence mean victory or only delay? That night, before sleep, he returns to the room where the 2 new prisoners are kept. He does not enter. He watches. Through the small slit in the door, he sees the translator sitting upright, not moving, not praying. His hands rest on his knees. His face unreadable. In the next cell, the woman is asleep, curled on her side, the candlelight flickering across her face. Her breathing is slow. She does not appear afraid. Tomas steps back. He closes the door gently. In the morning, both will be questioned again, not with force, but with stillness. Long silences. Repeated questions. The absence of time and daylight can reveal more than the rack ever could. Confession is not always pulled. Sometimes it is worn down until it falls on its own. Outside, the city winds down into another cold night. The wind scrapes against shutters. Families huddle near fire. And above it all, the bell of the monastery marks the hour with a single, distant strike. The bells ring once before dawn. Not for mass, not for procession, but as a signal to the scribes and guards that a session is about to begin. The halls fill not with footsteps, but with the low shuffle of movement practiced in silence. The great oak table in the interrogation chamber has been prepared. Ink is fresh, candles trimmed, chairs placed. Every detail of the room is unchanged, because that is part of the design. Heresy, to be properly confronted, must meet the same setting each time. Repetition breeds inevitability, and inevitability is the first step toward surrender. Tomas does not conduct these sessions personally. He observes, behind the screen, unseen. He listens. The guards bring in the young translator first. His chains are removed. He is offered bread and water. Nothing more. No questions at first. Only silence. It stretches. Eventually, the priest at the table begins, asking again about his travel records, about the books he reads, about the men he meets in port cities. Each answer is measured. He is careful. But with each question, the gap between the truth and its presentation becomes more obvious. The man does not lie, but he speaks as if facts are tools, not confessions. He keeps control over them. Tomas notes the tone, not the words. At one point, when asked why he avoids Mass while abroad, the man answers that faith can be carried without ritual. Tomas underlines the phrase, "This is not rebellion. It is ideology, a belief wrapped in restraint, the most dangerous kind." He writes one word beside the entry, philosophy, the shorthand he uses for those who have replaced obedience with thought. Later, the woman is brought in. Her session is different, less structured. She is asked about her childhood, her mother, whether she learned healing from books or from memory. She replies gently, even kindly. Her words are fluid. She speaks of compassion as a duty, of helping the poor as a form of prayer. When asked why she never sought ecclesiastical permission to perform such acts, she says, "Because I do not serve the church. I serve God." The room does not shift. No gasp, no outcry, only ink scratching across parchment. Tomas leans back. He has heard these words before, not often, but enough to know their shape. It is not pride. It is certainty. She believes in God, but not in the hierarchy. That is enough to damn her. By noon, the sessions end. The prisoners are returned to their cells. No torture, no screams, just silence and delay. Tomas leaves the chamber last, stepping carefully across the threshold as if it still holds the echo of words spoken hours earlier. He does not speak to anyone on his way back to his study. There, he finds 3 new letters. One is from the Suprema, a formal request for an updated list of active cases involving belief without clergy, a term increasingly used to describe the emerging problem of decentralized faith. The second is from a colleague in Córdoba, asking for guidance in a matter involving a manuscript that uses Christian imagery to express Neoplatonic philosophy. The third is anonymous and signed and unsealed. A warning. Scrawled in crude Latin, it reads, "Your God sees less than your silence does." The threat is clear, but the handwriting is amateur. Someone in the city is beginning to resist, quietly and without hope. The Inquisition does not fear anger. It fears cleverness. This letter shows neither. Still, it is kept, filed under spontaneous reaction, low risk. The rest of the afternoon is spent with the archivist, reviewing a set of confiscated books that arrived from Salamanca. Among them is a worn copy of a medical text referencing humoral theory alongside vague spiritual suggestions. Aligning the soul with the bile, one chapter says. Another book is a journal partially burned, recovered from the home of a man arrested for hosting nights of reflection, a phrase used to describe informal, unlicensed worship. One passage is still legible. It reads, "I do not need to see the light to know it burns. I only need to feel its heat inside my chest." Tomas reads the line 3 times, then closes the journal without comment. He tells the archivist to place it in the restricted collection. That evening, as the wind howls against the monastery walls and the city folds into darkness once more, Tomas walks the inner courtyard. The trees have begun to lose their leaves in earnest now. The air smells of damp stone, wax, and wood smoke. Above, clouds move without moonlight. He passes the chapel but does not enter. Instead, he walks to the far wall of the monastery grounds, a place few go. From there, he can see the edges of the city, the faint lights in the distant homes. Each flame a voice, each window a mind. He does not hate them. He does not judge them as individuals. But he knows they must not be allowed to speak without shape, without boundary, without fear. Back in his chamber, he records the day's summaries. 2 names marked for extended observation. 1 case escalated. 1 passage copied into the theological review. He ends the page with a single line, not meant for official eyes. "It is not the flame that threatens us. It is the warmth they find without it." He seals the journal and sits in silence until the candle dies. The following day arrives with a low mist hanging over Toledo. It wraps itself around the rooftops and steeples like a shroud, dulling the outlines of the city. Sound is muted. Even the church bells seem reluctant. The silence is not unfamiliar to Tomas. It reminds him of the days after executions when the crowd disperses but the fear remains. These days are useful. People whisper more cautiously when the world itself appears to be holding its breath. His first appointment is with a traveling Dominican friar who has spent the last 6 months moving through the northern provinces, preaching sermons designed to reinvigorate popular devotion. His manner is earnest, but his report is troubling. He speaks of rural towns where mass attendance has thinned, where holy days pass without full confessionals, where families still light candles but say fewer prayers. He notes that in one village, an entire feast of Corpus Christi was marked only by a shared meal and not a procession. He does not accuse the people of heresy. He simply says they have forgotten why they believe. Tomas listens carefully, noting every phrase. This is the danger not often spoken aloud, not the rebellion of the loud, but the indifference of the tired. The slow decay of habit into custom and custom into nothing. People may not turn against the church. They may simply stop looking toward it. And when they no longer expect answers, heresy doesn't need to seduce. It only needs to wait. After the friar departs, Tomas writes a letter to the Archbishop in Avila recommending a series of targeted sermons and inspections across the quietest parishes. Not for punishment, not yet, but for correction. The cure must appear as care. Fire does not burn where embers have gone cold. There must be kindling first. A reminder that judgment still watches. Later in the day, a new prisoner arrives. This time not through arrest, but voluntarily. A woman, middle-aged, presents herself to the tribunal and asks to confess a sin. She's escorted in quietly. Her robe is plain, her eyes dry. She says she has harbored doubts about the Eucharist for over a year, that she has continued to receive it without believing in transubstantiation, that she did not speak earlier because she feared her children would suffer. Tomas does not question her immediately. He reviews her background. She is from a respectable family. Her husband is a minor official. She has never been named in any previous reports. Her confession is unsolicited but precise. She uses the correct language. She does not excuse herself. But there is something strange in her timing. Why now? Why reveal a year of doubt just as the season turns, just as the Inquisitors have begun watching her neighborhood more closely? He marks her case for private examination. No imprisonment yet. No sentencing. He wants to know who she speaks to, what books she reads, whether this is a solitary crisis or a signal. Some confessions are not cries for forgiveness. They are smokescreens. In the afternoon, Tomas returns to the old ledgers not for review, but for patterns. He scans names across decades, looking for repetition in families. There is a theory among inquisitors quietly shared: heresy travels like blood. It follows lineage. A grandfather accused of Kabbalistic rituals, a son later suspected of secret fasts, a granddaughter who refuses to kneel at communion. Sometimes this is superstition. Sometimes it is simply true. He draws lines between names, marks cities, notes the years when heretical activity spiked. Always after famine, always after plague, or always after peace. Heretical thought does not flourish in chaos. It waits for stillness. When survival is no longer the question, meaning becomes one. By dusk, the sky has begun to clear. The mist lifts, revealing the rooftops again. Light returns without warmth. From his window, Tomas watches a group of boys kicking a leather ball down an alley. Their laughter is high and careless, too far from doctrine to matter. But even in that laughter, he knows the future is shaped. If no one reminds them what to fear, one day they may stop fearing altogether. He writes that thought in his journal, beneath the entries from the tribunal: fear, when left alone, decays. It must be fed, but not overfed. It must feel just close enough to become real. He closes the book and files it back beneath his desk among the older volumes written in his first years of office, years when fire was used more quickly, when confession came easier, when the lines between doubt and rebellion seemed clear. Now the lines blur. That night, he dreams not of judgment, but of silence. A great cathedral empty. No priests. No choir. Just rows of pews and the sound of wind passing through broken stained glass. The altar is bare. The candles unlit. He walks down the aisle, alone, hearing only his own steps. No heresy. No prayer. Just absence. And that somehow feels worse than anything he's heard in 1,000 interrogations. He wakes with the image still clear in his mind. And for a moment, just before the morning bell, he wonders what would happen if the people no longer feared the fire. Not because they defied it, but because they forgot it ever burned. The days now are slow and quiet, but not restful. In the tribunal, silence does not mean peace. It means latency. It means things are moving unseen, unheard. Tomas knows this kind of quiet well. It's the pause between accusation and reaction, the space where certainty begins to unravel. And lately, he has begun to notice the rhythm faltering, not in the tribunal itself, but in the city beyond it. The morning begins with a report from a small village to the south, no more than 30 households. A local priest has written of his concern that the people there no longer confess regularly. Not out of protest, but out of weariness. They attend Mass, but their eyes wander. They say the right words, but without conviction. They cross themselves, but only when others are watching. The priest describes it as hollow obedience. Tomas underlines the phrase. This is the condition most dangerous to the authority of the Church, not dissent, not heresy, but emptiness. A spiritual void covered by habit. It is harder to correct than rebellion because it cannot be forced. Fire can burn sin, but it cannot ignite something that has already gone cold. He sends a response. A suggestion to send a young, charismatic friar to preach there, someone unburdened by administrative duty. Someone who can remind the people that fear still has a voice. He includes a list of sermon topics: the Last Judgment, the eternal consequences of indifference, the sacred obligation of penance. Not to provoke them, but to rattle the silence. By mid-morning, he is reading again, not reports, but old theological texts. Books from the library's restricted wing. Not because he suspects them, but because he wants to understand the boundaries more clearly. He rereads passages from St. Bernard, Hildegard of Bingen, and the harsher visions of Tertullian. He searches for language that frames obedience not only as duty but as necessity. His margins fill with notations. Conviction must be louder than instinct. Fear must become instinct itself. Later, he receives word that the woman who confessed to doubt in the Eucharist has asked to speak again. This time privately. No formal session. No scribes. She says she remembers something more. He agrees to meet with her, not out of trust, but curiosity. Voluntary confessions often mean something is still hidden. They're rarely complete. They meet in a small side chamber, lit only by a single candle and the thin light of a barred window. She does not cry. She does not hesitate. She says her doubts began not with scripture, but with silence. One Sunday, the priest lifted the host and spoke the words of transubstantiation, and she realized she felt nothing. No awe. No fear. only routine. And from that moment forward, the rituals stopped being bridges to God. They became theater. She continued out of obligation. But the center had vanished. Tomas says little. He listens. He watches. He hears something in her voice he recognizes, not anger, not denial, but vacancy. Her faith didn't shatter. It eroded. He tells her she will remain under observation. No punishment, not yet. But her name will be added to a separate list. Not of heretics, but of those whose doubt is no longer useful to others. She will not speak in public. Her family will be told she is ill. Her presence will diminish. And soon only silence will remain. By late afternoon, the hallways darken early. A storm gathers at the city's edge. Wind snakes through the high windows of the tribunal, blowing dust across the marble floors. Thunder rumbles far off. Tomas stands at the edge of the archive, watching the weather shift. He has always liked storms. Not for the violence, but for the way they cleanse the air. He returns to his study to draft a new memorandum for the Suprema. In it, he recommends expanding the definition of passive deviation to include extended periods of disengagement from sacramental participation. He writes that in recent years, public rebellion has decreased, but inward disengagement has increased. That the tribunal must learn to address souls who are neither faithful nor unfaithful, only hollow. Before sealing the letter, he adds a final line: the fire alone is not enough. We must now illuminate, or they will forget we once burned. That evening, he walks the inner corridors in silence. The storm begins. Rain drums softly on the tiled roofs. The monastery absorbs it without reaction. Rain here is just weather, not metaphor. But for Tomas, the world outside has begun to feel symbolic again. Not in the grand, obvious way of scripture, but in the small, creeping way that ideas begin to echo themselves. At night, back in his chamber, he opens his personal journal, the one he keeps hidden, wrapped in linen, beneath a false panel in his desk. He flips back through entries written months, even years ago. He reads one. One day the rituals will remain, but the belief will be gone, and no one will know the difference. He closes the book without writing anything new. He leaves the candle burning and sits in the dark, listening to the storm. In another cell, down another corridor, a novice is practicing evening prayers. The same words repeated over and over, lips barely moving. The prayer ends. The silence remains. The morning after the storm is pale and clean. The sky stretches flat over Toledo like a sheet drawn tight across a body. Rainwater lingers in shallow puddles between stones, reflecting fragments of the monastery's towers. The air carries the scent of wet stone and extinguished candles. These are days that feel holy not because of miracles, but because everything has been washed silent. Tomas wakes early, as always. His robes are heavier today, damp from the humidity. He performs his routine not as devotion, but as structure. He no longer prays to ask. He prays to frame the silence. Ritual is the language that speaks even when faith does not answer. His first duty this morning is a follow-up examination of a minor case, a servant boy found in possession of a small talisman carved from bone, wrapped in linen and buried under the threshold of his master's house. When questioned, the boy claimed it was for protection, a charm his grandmother once made. He did not name saints. He did not mention scripture. The report notes his face held no malice, only confusion. Tomas orders the boy released, but the charm is kept and catalogued. It joins the long shelves of confiscated items, necklaces, trinkets, small stones with markings, torn pieces of parchment with nonsensical symbols. Each one a fragment of belief outside doctrine. Not always evil, rarely organized, but dangerous in their resilience. They do not die easily. They hide in corners, in kitchens, in childhood stories. Superstition is a heresy that does not argue. It simply survives. Midday brings a meeting with a scholar from the cathedral chapter. The man has recently been tasked with revising the local catechism and has grown concerned by what he calls semantic fatigue. He explains that words once feared have begun to lose weight. Hell, damnation, grace, they still appear in sermons, but they no longer land. He says the people nod when they hear them, but no longer change their expression, as though the words have passed through them too many times. Tomas listens carefully. This is the enemy he now studies more than sin erosion. Not of morality, but of meaning. He asks the scholar whether new words should be introduced. Stronger ones. But the man shakes his head. Stronger words only invite analysis. And analysis invites comparison. The solution is not new fire. It is old silence layered more carefully. If fear no longer works, uncertainty must. After the scholar departs, Tomas walks alone through the restricted archive. Here the walls are thick with dust and warnings. Some texts are centuries old, unread for decades, sealed beneath wax or red-inked orders. He stops before a shelf labeled non-prohibited but suspicious. This is where the danger truly lives, not in banned books, but in tolerated ones, the ones that say enough to inspire but not enough to accuse. He removes a slim volume, handwritten, anonymous. Its pages explore the nature of divine absence, not denial, but delay. It suggests that God may choose silence not as punishment, but as invitation. The implication is subtle but profound. That silence might itself be sacred. That absence might be the purest form of presence. Tomas closes the book slowly. He knows why it was kept, not destroyed. Because it is dangerous only when understood. And few understand anymore. He does not order it burned. He places it back on the shelf, spine inward, page edge out. Later, word arrives from the Northern Tribunal. A minor nobleman's daughter has refused to marry the man selected for her by the church. She claims to have received a dream in which she saw herself becoming a teacher, not a wife. The family is outraged. They want her punished not for heresy, but for shame. The church cannot tolerate dreams that contradict its script. Tomas sends instruction, do not accuse publicly. Send her to a convent under the care of a particularly strict abbess. Isolate her. Delay her. Do not silence her yet. Wait to see if others begin to dream like her. If they do, then act. The rest of the afternoon is spent reading confessions. Some are routine. Others are fragmented, confused. A young blacksmith admits to thoughts of suicide. A widow claims her dead husband spoke to her in sleep, telling her not to attend Massachusetts. A boy claims to have seen an angel but cannot describe its face. These are not crimes. They are signs. Faith is not failing. It is mutating. By evening, the wind picks up again. The sky has begun to darken early, clouds pulling low over the horizon. From his window, Tomas watches as the city lights flicker to life, candles in windows, lanterns over doors. Each flame is a memory. Each one a kind of resistance against whatever waits beyond. He lights a single candle in his chamber. He opens his journal, then closes it again without writing. Instead, he returns to the chapel. This time he kneels. Not to pray, not to speak. He kneels only to listen. There is no voice, only the sound of wind against stone. And for the first time in many years, he feels unsure whether silence still means control. The monastery wakes in fog. Not the light, drifting mist of dawn, but a deep, still shroud that turns the city into a memory of itself. Buildings appear as outlines. Streets become corridors of pale gray. Bells sound muffled as if rung underwater. Inside, everything continues as it must: prayers, tasks, transcriptions, but the air carries something heavier than weather. Even the younger monks speak less. Tomas moves through the morning without words. He receives his reports, signs what needs signing, and sends his orders with small notations in the margins. Today's silence feels less like discipline and more like a symptom. He senses it not just in himself, but in the tribunal as a whole, a weight that no one acknowledges but all seem to carry. The first report he reviews is from the surveillance of a mid-level bureaucrat suspected of harboring forbidden books. There's no proof yet. Only second-hand rumors and the fact that he's hosted 3 private gatherings in as many weeks. These meetings are always small, always attended by the same 6 individuals: 2 scholars, a merchant, a young priest, and an old musician. Each one, in isolation, would not warrant suspicion. Together, they form a pattern. That is what the Inquisition watches for. The report notes that their conversations cannot be overheard, but that afterward, one attendee always leaves with a sealed envelope. No one knows what's inside. Tomas reads this twice. He does not act yet. Instead, he sends an instruction: follow the envelopes. Do not intercept. Observe. Patterns, once they begin, often reveal themselves more clearly when unbroken. He sets the file aside and turns to another case: a foreign traveler recently detained near the cathedral. A woman, French by accent, claimed to be a seeker of relics. She possessed no letters of introduction, no documentation from a religious authority, and carried with her a pouch containing bone fragments, a torn page of Latin text, and a painted icon of unknown origin. She spoke respectfully but vaguely. Her story shifted slightly in each telling. Tomas does not order punishment. He sends a directive to transfer her quietly to a remote monastery for containment. Not for heresy, but because uncertainty must be contained before it becomes contagious. Curiosity, left unchecked, becomes narrative. And narrative spreads. Midday brings a visitor, a bishop from a neighboring region, older, cautious, with the stiff posture of a man who has spent decades balancing faith with politics. He brings no accusations, only concerns. He says the nobles are becoming less engaged, that they still attend Mass, still support the church with gold and land, but do so now with visible disinterest. Their sons are less obedient. Their daughters speak of foreign poets. There is no rebellion, only drift. Tomas knows this tone. It is the voice of someone who has begun to sense the tide turning but cannot name the wind. He assures the bishop that measures are in place, that the tribunal watches the margins, that the silence is not inaction but precision. But when the man leaves, Tomas writes only one word in his notes: erosion. The threat no longer comes from books or sorcery or open defiance. It comes from the spaces in between, from the people who do not speak, who do not believe loudly enough to be noticed, but who quietly stop kneeling, stop fearing, stop listening. This is not apostasy. It is drift, and it is harder to extinguish than flame. In the afternoon, he walks the halls without direction. He passes novices studying, scribes copying verdicts, a monk washing the chapel steps. All of it appears normal, but beneath it he senses the shift. Years ago, the monastery buzzed with certainty. Now it echoes with repetition. Everything is still done, but less is felt. He returns to his chamber and unrolls a map of Castile. He marks towns where heretical ideas were once found, towns now quiet. He marks places where belief was strong. Most are dimming. A few, mostly poor villages with little outside contact, still burn brightly. Not because they are devout, but because they have not yet been asked to think beyond ritual. He marks those as stable. It is early evening when he receives a sealed message from the Suprema. A new policy is being considered. It would grant tribunals greater authority to investigate those who are not accused, but who display extended behavioral ambiguity. The language is carefully phrased, but Tomas reads the intent clearly. The Church is beginning to acknowledge that the next threat may not be disobedience, but apathy. He supports the proposal, quietly fully, but he also notes in his private journal the cost. He writes, "If we begin to punish silence, we must first prove that we can hear it. As darkness falls, candles are lit. Thunder rumbles again on the horizon. A second storm, or perhaps the same one, returning." Tomas walks the outer corridor beneath the high arches of the monastery where rain has begun to seep in through small cracks in the stone. The building itself, like the institution it shelters, is strong but aging. Cracks are not yet breaks, but they widen. He passes a wooden cross, worn down by time, the face of Christ smoothed almost to nothing. Once it might have comforted him. Now it reminds him of repetition, of memory worn thin by use. That night he does not light his candle. He writes nothing. He sleeps early, not from peace, but from weight. And in the silence of the monastery, another day ends. The next morning, the fog has cleared, but a new heaviness settles over the tribunal. The kind not born of weather, but of accumulation. Small changes, slow shifts, decisions made in silence that begin to lean together like stones, forming something larger than intended. Tomas feels it in the stillness of the corridors, in the way the younger clerics hesitate before speaking, in the glances that pass too quickly between scribes. Routine does not stop. It cannot. A tribunal survives by its constancy. But beneath the surface, doubt does not scream, it seeps. Tomas begins the day reviewing a dossier from the eastern provinces. A woman, wife of a magistrate, has begun writing poetry under a false name. Her verses are not overtly heretical. They praise divine mystery, echo scriptural imagery, even reference saints. But they also speak of solitude as holiness, of finding truth not through sacraments but through inward silence. The poems have been passed among noblewomen, copied by hand, whispered about. He reads them twice. They are beautiful. Too beautiful. Beauty can soften edges that doctrine was meant to harden. A single metaphor, if allowed to root, can do what fire cannot, transform how a soul understands God. He makes a note in his ledger: monitor circulation. Do not accuse. Track the copyists. Before noon, a new confession arrives. A monk from a remote monastery has admitted to doubts about eternal punishment. Not disbelief, just hesitation. He claims he cannot reconcile a loving God with infinite torment. He says he has fasted, prayed, but the question remains. He submitted his confession voluntarily through his abbot. It is written with care, but also with urgency. Tomas reads it, then sets it aside. He does not issue punishment, but he orders the monk reassigned to manual labor. Let his hands remember what the mind has begun to forget, and let him be watched. Doubt that matures becomes doctrine. Or worse, philosophy. After midday prayers, he meets with two inquisitors newly arrived from Valencia. Young, ambitious, still filled with the fire that once drove Tomas himself. They speak quickly, eagerly. They bring stories of newly formed networks, thinkers, minor priests, even merchants, sharing ideas that blur the lines between heresy and theology. Not defiance, not rejection, just reshaping. A soft, deliberate reframing of faith as private, portable, individual. Tomas listens. He does not match their energy. He has seen too many flames burn out. He tells them to focus not on the loudest voices, but the quietest ones. The dangerous ones do not shout. They whisper. They write letters with no signatures. They host dinners with no sermons. They say nothing and let others assume meaning. He dismisses them with caution, then retreats to the archive. There, he studies the confiscated journals of a former clergyman exiled years ago for preaching excessive mercy. The man's writings were not banned, only shelved. They speak of forgiveness not as earned, but inevitable, as something that rises from within the soul like breath. They do not attack the church, but they quietly erase the need for it. Tomas reads a passage, "If God is in all, who is outside?" He closes the journal slowly. He does not tremble, but he does not breathe for a long moment. Later that evening, a messenger arrives from a convent on the outskirts of the city. A nun, recently returned from Rome, has begun teaching the younger sisters a form of contemplative prayer that requires no words, no images, no intercession. Just breath, stillness, focus. She claims it was practiced by early desert mystics. She cites obscure saints. Her abbess, unsure, reports it not as rebellion, but as deviation. Tomas sends a short response: delay her teaching. Assign her to caretaking duties. Watch the novices. If their behavior changes, act immediately. The Inquisition cannot burn every deviation. Some must be quietly displaced. Some must simply be made to disappear, not from the world, but from relevance. Influence can be suffocated without fire. Night falls earlier now. The wind from the plains carries the first hint of winter. In the courtyard, leaves have gathered in corners, small spirals of forgotten color. Tomas walks alone, listening not to the wind, but to the quiet it leaves behind. Back in his chamber, he opens his journal. Tonight, he writes more slowly. The enemy now is not error. It is drift, not defiance, but fatigue. They do not fight. They forget. And what is forgotten cannot be punished. It must be replaced. Not with violence, with fear shaped like memory. He stops, stares at the candle flame, then adds one final line. But even fear fades when no one remembers why it was lit. He closes the book, blows out the candle. Somewhere beyond the city walls, someone writes a poem that will never be signed. The wind sharpens as winter approaches. It cuts across the monastery's stone courtyard and finds every crack in the shutters, every flaw in the ancient walls. The building groans at night now. The cold reveals what time has hidden. Men move faster through the halls, robes pulled tighter, candles lit sooner. Even silence feels denser in this season. A weight, not a space. Tomas begins his morning earlier than usual. Not from duty, but from unrest. Sleep has become more elusive. His dreams, when they come, no longer speak in symbols or fire, but in absence. Empty churches, closed doors, the sound of nothing repeated. He rises, dresses, and walks through the cloister before sunrise. In the dim, pre-dawn blue, he hears only his own footsteps. This place, once filled with certainty, now feels like it waits for something unnamed. His desk is stacked higher than usual. Letters from regional priests, intercepted correspondence from suspected circles, copies of sermons delivered in border towns that show troubling signs of reinterpretation. Phrases once carved in stone are now being softened by those who speak them. A young priest in Segovia has begun describing hell as a state of heart, not a place. Another in Zaragoza speaks of salvation as an awakening. Neither have been accused, but both are now watched. Tomas reviews these cases mechanically, but his mind drifts. It is no longer scandal that troubles him. It is the slow, quiet reshaping of belief into language that bends, then snaps. Not all rebellion screams. Some of it sighs. In mid-morning, he receives a sealed report from the convent he has monitored closely. The nun who introduced silent prayer has grown more popular among the novices. They seek her guidance not for doctrine, but for clarity. They ask questions with unfamiliar shapes. What if God listens in silence? What if our words are distractions? The abbess is concerned, but uncertain. She asks for permission to remove the nun from her position. Tomas grants it, but gently. He orders the nun sent to a quieter convent farther from the city, not accused, not punished, only moved. He knows that her words, once spoken, will linger, but distance dulls impact. Absence will do what punishment might inflame. The afternoon is filled with testimony. Not from prisoners, but from informants, ordinary men and women who come forward with suspicions, observations, fears. One describes her neighbor humming unfamiliar melodies during the rosary. Another speaks of a merchant's wife who refuses to bow her head during prayer. These reports are not valuable for what they say, but for what they signal. People are unsure again. The edges of orthodoxy blur when eyes stop watching. Tomas files the statements. Repetition will reveal the true patterns. By evening, the fog has returned. He watches it drift over the rooftops from his high window. It no longer feels like weather. It feels like metaphor. He lights a single candle and opens a scroll he's saved for months. A translation of a North African mystic, written centuries ago and never widely shared. The text speaks of divine withdrawal, the idea that God steps back not in anger, but to force the soul to move. That absence is a teaching tool. The thought is dangerous but compelling. Tomas reads it twice. Then, without deciding why, he returns it to its case. He walks slowly through the scriptorium, where younger monks still copy decrees in practiced hands. Their faces are calm, their lines perfect, but he wonders if they understand what they write, or if they simply transcribe like memory passed without meaning. Back in his chamber, he reviews one last document before sleep. A draft of a new protocol proposed by the Suprema. A broader definition of pre-heretical conditions, allowing for earlier intervention, even in cases without action, only disposition. Tomas understands the necessity, but as he reads the language, he feels something under his ribs. Not resistance, but recognition. The Church is preparing to prosecute not what is spoken, but what is not. He places the document in his desk, then opens his personal journal. Tonight he writes slowly, as if the ink might betray him. There is no longer heresy, only absence, only withdrawal. The soul steps away before the mouth does. I once believed punishment corrected this. Now I wonder if absence spreads not from disobedience, but from our own rituals becoming unread. He hesitates, then continues. Perhaps we are not losing them. Perhaps we are simply becoming less visible. Perhaps we are fading from within. He stops, folds the journal closed. Outside, the bell rings once. The sound doesn't carry far. The monastery is quiet. Not the silence of prayer, or discipline, or fear, but the deep, hollow quiet of something that once held weight and now merely occupies space. Even the echoes are softer. The bells still ring. The routines are still followed. But something beneath it all has shifted. There is less urgency, less resistance, less friction, and in its place something stranger, distance. Tomas notices it first not in the prisoners, but in his own scribes. Their eyes do not lift as quickly when he enters a room. Their copies are precise, but their margins remain bare, no annotations, no commentary, no questions. They work like hands disconnected from thought. And the younger novices, those who came to the monastery filled with zeal, now speak in low tones not of sin, but of obligation. They know what must be done, but not why. Faith built on terror can endure for centuries, but fear without fire fades. And Tomas has begun to see that the embers are cooling, not because the world has changed, but because the Church's voice no longer reaches it in the same way. A final report arrives. A boy, 12 years old, overheard reciting a version of the Pater Noster with missing lines. He said his mother had taught it to him and that she said God listens better when we speak less. The boy did not understand the error. He repeated what he was told. The priest who reported it was unsure whether to act. Tomas reads the report and does nothing. He marks it but does not pursue it. It is not blasphemy. It is adaptation. He walks the monastery alone in the afternoon light, the long shadows drawing lines across the stone like cracks. He passes the chapel where only 2 monks kneel in prayer. He passes the records hall where dust now settles faster than ink dries. He passes a hallway where the fresco of St. Michael once glowed brightly, now faded, flaked. The angel's sword is still raised but dulled. In his chambers he begins the final letter. It is addressed to the Suprema. It reads as a report, but it is more than that. It is a warning. The tribunal continues its duty. Cases are processed. Patterns identified. Corrections issued. But I must report a change not in the behavior of the people but in the air around them. They are quieter now. Less confrontational. But not more faithful. They comply, but without presence. Their mouths move, but their eyes are gone. There is an erosion not of doctrine, but of relevance. The flame is not extinguished, it is no longer seen. I fear we have become shadows. They do not fear what they do not feel. They do not resist what they no longer believe can touch them. This is not failure. This is transformation. The fire that once lit their souls now flickers behind glass. We still burn, but they are elsewhere. He signs it, seals it, but does not send it. Instead, he places it in the drawer with the others, the letters written but never released. There are dozens now. A history not of the church, but of his own slow conversion from certainty to observation. At dusk, he steps outside the monastery walls for the first time in weeks. The streets are quiet. Not because of fear, but because of rhythm. The city moves to a different tempo now. Less reactive. More internal. He walks unnoticed through the marketplace, past shuttered stalls, past vendors who no longer look for approval. He hears a woman humming, not a hymn, but a melody without name. It is simple. Wordless. But full of breath. He does not interrupt her. He returns before the final bell. The day ends without fanfare. No trials. No tortures. No recantations. Only stillness. He enters the chapel once more. Alone. No candles are lit. No incense burns. He sits on the edge of the pew and looks not at the crucifix, but at the space around it, the shadow on the wall where the flame used to flicker. He does not pray. He listens. And for the first time, he realizes that what he hears is not silence. It is distance. Not between God and man, but between power and belief. He remains there until the night swallows the last of the light. The Inquisition continues. But something else has ended. Not loudly, not with fire, but with the quiet knowledge that control is not eternal, and that even fear must one day kneel before forgetfulness. Let them remember or not. History is written by fire, but it fades in ash, and the ashes do not speak. If this story gave you new insight, if it challenged what you thought you knew, or made you see history in a deeper way, consider subscribing to the channel. We dive into stories like this to uncover the layers beneath the surface, to bring you history that isn't just informative, but transformative. Hit the like button if you found this episode valuable and leave a comment with your thoughts. What should we explore next? Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and never stop asking, what's the full story?